There's a person in your life you've been trying to change, and it isn't working. You've explained, you've argued, you've been patient, then blunt, then patient again. You've built the case so carefully that no reasonable human could disagree with it. They haven't moved an inch. Here's what nobody tells you. You didn't fail because your argument was weak. You failed because you were arguing at all. In 1936, a failed salesman from Missouri wrote down 30 things he'd watched actually work on real people. The book has sold over 30 million copies. Warren Buffett hung its diploma on his wall for 60 years. And it's the most misused book in history because most people take the tricks and leave the one thing that makes them work. So here's the whole book. Every chapter in Carnegie's own order, all 30 principles, every story. The killer in the electric chair who thought he was a nice guy. The letter Lincoln wrote and never sent. And at the end, the honest part, exactly when this book stops being wisdom and becomes manipulation, and how people always know. It starts with a rule you break every day. Part 1, Chapter 1. If you want to gather honey, don't kick over the beehive. Before we open the book, 30 seconds of context, because it changes how you hear everything after it. The man who wrote this was a failed salesman from Missouri. Dale Carnegie, no relation to Andrew, rode a horse to college because his family couldn't afford to board him in town. He failed at selling correspondence courses. He failed as an actor. He wrote a novel nobody wanted. And then he started teaching a night class in public speaking at a New York YMCA on commission because they wouldn't give him a salary. And his students didn't actually want public speaking. They wanted to handle a boss, a spouse, a customer, an argument. So he went looking for a textbook on that, and there wasn't one. So he spent 15 years building it, and here's the part that matters. Not from a chair. He'd take a principal into the classroom, make grown adults try it on real people that week, and report back what happened. Anything that didn't survive contact with a real spouse or a real customer got cut. So this is not a book of theories. It's a field manual assembled from thousands of small, unglamorous, real-world tests. Now. Chapter 1. Now imagine you're in New York, May 1931, and you're one of about 10,000 people standing in the street watching a siege. Inside a top-floor apartment is a man the police commissioner has called one of the most dangerous criminals in the history of New York. A cop killer. He'll kill, the commissioner says, at the drop of a feather. Police are on the roof pumping tear gas through the walls. Machine guns are set up on the surrounding buildings. For over an hour, one of New York's finest residential districts sounds like a war. And inside, while bullets are coming through the plaster, this man is writing a letter. It's addressed to whom it may concern. His own blood is running from his wounds onto the paper as he writes, leaving a crimson trail across it. Here's what he wrote. Under my coat is a weary heart, but a kind one that would do nobody any harm. Now let me tell you what this man had done a short time before. He was parked on a country road on Long Island with his girlfriend. A policeman walked up to the car and said, "Let me see your license." Without a word, he pulled his gun and cut the officer down. And as the dying man fell, he leapt out of the car, grabbed the officer's own revolver, and fired another bullet into the body on the ground. That's the man with the kind heart that would do nobody any harm. His name was Gun Crowley, and they sent him to the electric chair at Sing Sing. And when he arrived at the death house, did he say, "This is what I get for killing people"? No. He said, "This is what I get for defending myself." Carnegie isn't telling you a crime story. He's running an experiment at the far end of the scale to see whether the effect holds where it should break. So he runs it again. Al Capone, public enemy number 1, the most notorious gang leader in Chicago, a man with an actual body count. What does Capone say about himself? I have spent the best years of my life giving people the lighter pleasures, helping them have a good time, and all I get is abuse, the existence of a hunted man, a public benefactor, an unappreciated one, misunderstood, and Dutch Schultz said the same in a newspaper interview before he was shot dead in Newark. Public benefactor. And he believed it. Then Carnegie does something a lesser writer wouldn't bother with. He checks with a professional. He corresponds with Lewis Laws, warden of Sing Sing for years, a man who has watched thousands of convicted criminals up close across decades. And Laws tells him few of the criminals in Sing Sing regard themselves as bad men. They're just as human as you and I. They rationalize, they explain, they can tell you exactly why they had to crack that safe or be quick on the trigger. Most of them will argue, with reasoning that's sometimes fallacious and sometimes perfectly logical, that they should never have been imprisoned at all. So here's the finding, and everything else in this book stands on it. Almost nobody, ever, under any circumstances, thinks they're the problem. Not the murderer, not the racketeer, not the man in the death house with a policeman's blood on him. And now the question that should make you a little uncomfortable. If Capone and Crowley and the men behind those walls don't blame themselves for anything, what about the people you deal with every day? Your brother-in-law, your co-worker, the person who cut you off this morning. What about you? Think of your last real argument. Replay your side of it. There's a story in there, and in that story you are reasonable. You were provoked, or tired, or you'd already explained it twice, or they started it. The story is airtight. Everyone's is. Right now, somewhere, someone is telling a friend a story about something you did, and in that story, you're the difficult one, and their version is airtight too. Nobody walks around feeling like the villain of their own life. That's not a moral failing. It's how the machine is built, and every time you criticize someone, you're firing at a target that is architecturally incapable of accepting the hit. So what does criticism actually do? Carnegie's line, criticism is futile because it puts a person on the defensive and usually makes them strive to justify themselves. It's dangerous because it wounds their precious pride, hurts their sense of importance, and arouses resentment. Notice, he doesn't say criticism is unkind. He says it's futile, completely different objection and much harder to argue with. You can decide you don't care about being kind. You can't decide to care less about being ineffective. He gives it a phrase I think about constantly. Criticism is like a homing pigeon. It always returns home. You send it out. You feel that clean, hot rush of finally having said the thing. And then it circles back and lands on your own roof, weeks later, as a person who is now slightly less honest with you, slightly more careful around you, and permanently in possession of a small grievance you've forgotten you created. And there's the sharpest observation in the chapter, a psychology finding disguised as an animal story. Skinner's experiments showed that an animal rewarded for good behavior learns much faster and retains much more than an animal punished for bad behavior. And later studies show the same holds for humans. By criticizing, we don't make lasting change. We incite resentment. Punishment teaches one thing very efficiently, not don't do that. Don't get caught doing that around you. And you've been teaching it, at home and at work, for years. Now the story that gives this weight, because a rule about not criticizing a co-worker is easy. Watch what it costs at maximum stakes. July 1863. Gettysburg. Lee is retreating south and reaches the Potomac, and finds a swollen, impassable river in front of him and a victorious Union army behind him. He's trapped. Lincoln sees it instantly. This is the war. Capture Lee here and it's over. So he orders General Meade not to call a council of war, but to attack Lee immediately. He telegraphs the order. Then he sends a special messenger to demand immediate action. And Meade does the opposite of everything he was told. He calls a council of war in direct violation of the order. He hesitates, he procrastinates, he telegraphs back every manner of excuse. He refuses point blank to attack. And then the waters recede, and Lee walks his army across the Potomac and escapes. Lincoln is beside himself. He says to his son Robert, "What does this mean? Great God, what does this mean? We had them within our grasp, and had only to stretch forth our hands, and they were ours. Yet nothing that I could say or do could make the army move. Under the circumstances, almost any general could have defeated Lee. If I had gone up there, I could have whipped him myself." So Lincoln, bitterly disappointed, and remember this is a man famous for restraint, sits down and writes Meade a letter. And it's a scalpel. "I do not believe you appreciate the magnitude of the misfortune involved in Lee's escape. He was within our easy grasp, and to have closed upon him would have ended the war. Your golden opportunity is gone, and I am distressed immeasurably because of it." What do you suppose Meade did when he read that letter? Meade never read that letter. Lincoln never sent it. It was found among his papers after his death. And here's the minute worth imagining. Carnegie guesses, honestly flagging it as a guess, that after writing it, Lincoln looked out the window and thought, "Just a minute. It's easy enough for me to sit here in the quiet of the White House and order Meade to attack. But if I'd been at Gettysburg and seen as much blood as Meade has seen this past week, and if my ears had been pierced with the screams of the wounded and dying, maybe I wouldn't be so anxious to attack either. If I had Meade's timid temperament, perhaps I'd have done exactly what he did. And then the calculation. If I send this letter, it will relieve my feelings, but it will make Meade try to justify himself. It will make him condemn me. It will arouse hard feelings, impair all his further usefulness as a commander, and perhaps force him to resign. So the letter goes in a drawer. I find that almost unbearable in a good way. The war is prolonged. Thousands more people will die. Lincoln is right, completely, unambiguously right, and he knows the exact words that would prove it. And he swallows all of it because he ran the arithmetic on what being right would buy, and the answer was a relieved feeling for me, a defensive general for the country, and not one soldier saved. 9 words. It will relieve my feelings, but it will make Meade try to justify himself. That's the chapter. Criticism relieves your feelings. It's for you. It's a private pleasure billed to somebody else's account. And Lincoln could do it not because of temperament. As a young man, he was vicious, wrote anonymous newspaper letters mocking people, and one nearly got him killed in a duel with cavalry sabers on a sandbar in the Mississippi. That terrified him into a lifelong policy. Don't criticize them. They are just what we would be under similar circumstances. The objection, because you have one, and it's fair. So I never give feedback. Never hold anyone accountable. No. Carnegie isn't saying consequences don't exist. He's saying criticism is a bad tool for changing a person. And there are 29 more chapters here. 9 of them specifically about how to correct someone's mistake and have them thank you for it. What he's taking away isn't your ability to address problems. It's the specific move of registering your disapproval and expecting it to function as motivation. The subtler objection is the real one. Criticizing feels productive. When you point out the flaw, something happened. In you. There was a discharge. But check the ledger next morning. Is the behavior different, or is the relationship? Here's the test I use now, straight from that unsent letter. Before I say the corrective thing, am I about to say this because it will change the outcome, or because it will relieve my feelings? You always know. The tell is whether you've been rehearsing the phrasing. Dr. Johnson, God himself, sir, does not propose to judge man until the end of his days. Why should you and I? Any fool can criticize, condemn, and complain, and most fools do. It takes character and self-control to be understanding and forgiving. Principle 1. Don't criticize, condemn, or complain. And the moment you take criticism away, there's a hole where your influence used to be. Something has to fill it, which is the big secret of the next chapter, and it cost Andrew Carnegie $1 million a year. Part 1, Chapter 2, The Big Secret of Dealing with People. It's 1921. A man named Charles Schwab, not the stockbroker, the steel man, becomes the first president of the United States Steel Company. He's 38, and Andrew Carnegie pays him $1 million a year. Understand what that meant in 1921. More than $3,000 a day when a good living was $50 a week. It made newspapers. So everyone asked the obvious question. Why? Was Schwab a genius? No. Did he know more about making steel than anyone else? Also no. Schwab said so himself plainly. He had many men working for him who knew more about steel than he did. He wasn't the best metallurgist in his own building. He wasn't close. So what was Carnegie buying for $1,000 a working hour? Schwab's own answer, the ability to deal with people. That's the entire line item. And he described the mechanism in a sentence that I think is one of the most quietly devastating things in this book. He said the ability to arouse enthusiasm among people is the greatest asset he possessed, and that the way to develop the best that is in a person is by appreciation and encouragement. Then the part that stings. There is nothing else that so kills the ambitions of a person as criticism from superiors. He never criticized anyone. He gave people incentive to work. He was eager to praise and loath to find fault. If he liked anything, he was hearty in his approbation and lavish in his praise. And then, in my wide association in life, meeting with many and great people in various parts of the world, I have yet to find the person, however great or exalted their station, who did not do better work and put forth greater effort under a spirit of approval than they would ever do under a spirit of criticism. Sit on that 1 second, because he isn't saying be nice. He's making a testable claim. He has never once met the exception. Not among executives, not among steel workers, not among the great men of his era. 0 in a lifetime of looking. Now count your own sample. Think of a time someone tore into you, a boss, a parent, a coach, and you went back to your desk fired up and did the best work of your life. Do you have one? Most people, searching honestly, find that criticism produced something very specific in them. A defense, a justification, a story about why the critic was unfair. Maybe compliance if they had power over you, but not effort. Never that unforced extra effort that comes from somewhere else entirely. And the punchline is about the ledger, not the ethics. Andrew Carnegie, one of the shrewdest allocators of capital in American history, a man who did not hand out million-dollar salaries out of sentiment, looked at all of it and decided this was the most valuable single skill in his entire company. More valuable than knowing how to make the steel. That's not a moral claim, that's a price. So why does appreciation work like that? Carnegie goes underneath it, and the answer is the engine of this whole book. Imagine you're a farm boy in Missouri, and your father breeds prize hogs, Duroc Jersey hogs and white-faced cattle, and he takes them to the county fairs across the Middle West, and he wins, first prizes by the score, and your father takes the blue ribbons and pins them onto a long sheet of white muslin. And whenever anybody comes to the house, friends, visitors, anyone, He gets that sheet of muslin out, and he holds one end, and you hold the other, and he displays the ribbons. Here's the observation that boy made, and built a career on. The hogs didn't care about the ribbons. The hogs won them. The hogs were indifferent. The ribbons meant precisely nothing to the animals that earned them, and everything to the man holding the muslin. That's the difference between us and them, not tools, not language, the hunger to feel important. That boy was Dale Carnegie. There is a hunger in human beings that is almost never satisfied, and the rare person who honestly satisfies it will hold people in the palm of their hand. Freud said everything we do springs from two motives, the sex urge and the desire to be great. William James said the deepest principle in human nature is the craving to be appreciated. Not wish, not desire, craving, a gnawing, unfaltering human hunger. And once you have that lens, look what it explains. It's what drove an uneducated, poverty-stricken grocery clerk to study law books he found at the bottom of a barrel of household junk he'd bought for 50 cents, a clerk named Lincoln. It's what made Dickens write and Christopher Wren build. It made Rockefeller pile up millions he never spent. It makes the richest family in your town build a house far too big for anyone to need. It's why you want the newer phone and why you find ways to mention your kids' achievements. And it drives the other direction too. The average young criminal, according to a New York police commissioner of the day, is filled with ego, and his first request after arrest is for the newspapers that make him a hero, happy to take the sentence as long as his face runs beside the movie stars. When the FBI were hunting John Dillinger, he ran into a farmhouse in Minnesota and announced, "I'm Dillinger." He was proud of being public enemy number one. So Carnegie lands the line that reframes everything. Tell me how you get your feeling of importance, and I'll tell you what you are. That determines your character. That is the most significant thing about you. Rockefeller got his by funding a hospital in Peking for millions of poor people he would never meet. Dillinger got his by robbing banks. Same engine, same fuel, opposite outputs. The difference between those two men is not that one of them was above needing to feel important. Neither was. Nobody is. And history is ridiculous with it. George Washington wanted to be addressed as His Mightiness, the President of the United States. Columbus begged for the title Admiral of the Ocean and Viceroy of India. Catherine the Great refused to open a letter not addressed to Her Imperial Majesty. Victor Hugo hoped the city of Paris might be renamed after him. Even Shakespeare went and procured a coat of arms for his family, because being Shakespeare, apparently, wasn't quite enough. Quick, before we go on. Your turn, and you have to be honest, or it's worthless. Where do you get yours? Not where you'd like to. Where do you actually feel the little click? Being the smartest in the meeting? Being needed? Being the one who's never wrong? Being the exhausted one who does everything? Being the person with the standards? Being unbothered? Whatever that is, that's your character in Carnegie's terms. And here's the sting, you are surrounded at all times by people running that same program on a different setting. They are all as hungry as you are, and almost nobody is feeding them, which is the entire opportunity. So, give honest and sincere appreciation. Simple, almost embarrassingly so. Which is why the rest of this chapter is the important part, because there's a counterfeit. The difference between appreciation and flattery. Carnegie is crisp, one is sincere and the other insincere. One comes from the heart out, the other from the teeth out. One is unselfish, the other selfish. One is universally admired, the other universally condemned. And the practical difference, which is what makes it usable, appreciation is about what a person did. Flattery is about what you want. Appreciation requires you to have actually looked at them. Flattery requires nothing but a motive. There's a bust of General Obregón in Mexico City with an inscription carved into it. Don't be afraid of enemies who attack you. Be afraid of the friends who flatter you. If flattery worked, life would be simple. We'd all say nice things insincerely and get everything we want. It doesn't work, and it doesn't for the same reason your family always knows. Over time, what you are leaks through everything you do. Flattery is technique with nothing behind it, and people feel the nothing. Not always immediately. Always eventually. So how do you give the real thing without becoming a person who compliments shoes? You look for something specific and true. Stop thinking about your own accomplishments and wants for a moment and try to work out the other person's good points. Then say it, not in vague, cheap, oily flattery, but in honest, specific appreciation. Emerson. Every man I meet is my superior in some way. In that, I learn of him. If that's true of Emerson, it's probably true of you at the checkout counter. And the scale of it is small. Leave a trail of little sparks of gratitude on your daily trips. And you'll be amazed how they set small flames of friendship that become rose beacons on your next visit. Small, daily, unremarkable. One story to make it concrete. A father comes home exhausted and his son is being a nuisance. He's about to snap, and instead he uses Schwab's principle, looks at the kid, and finds something honest to praise. And the thing that guts me, the boy is so unused to it that he goes quiet, then follows his father around, then finally asks, "You really think so?" And the father realizes this child had been starving in plain sight in his own house for years, and the daily criticism had been so constant it had become the weather. You have someone like that. I do. There is someone within 20 feet of you most days who has not heard a specific, honest, unprompted good thing from you in, what? Months. And the strangest part is it costs nothing. Not money, not time. 10 seconds. The reason we don't do it isn't cost. It's that we're busy holding our own end of the muslin. Principle 2, give honest and sincere appreciation. Part 1. Chapter 3. He who can do this has the whole world with him. He who cannot walks a lonely way. Carnegie opens this one with fishing, and I love it because it's so blunt. He says, "I'm very fond of strawberries and cream. But for some strange reason, fish prefer worms. So when I go fishing, I don't think about what I want. I think about what they want. I don't bait the hook with strawberries and cream. I dangle a worm in front of the fish and say, 'Wouldn't you like to have that?' And then, why not use the same common sense when fishing for people? Because here's what we actually do. You want your kid to stop smoking. So you tell them, what? That you don't want them to smoke. You want your team to hit the deadline, so you explain that the deadline matters to you. You want your spouse to help around the house, so you explain how tired you are. Every one of those is strawberries and cream, dangled in front of a fish. The principle, the only way on earth to influence other people is to talk about what they want and show them how to get it. Not the only nice way. The only way. That's a strong claim, so test it. Every voluntary thing you have ever done in your life, you did because you wanted something. Even the things that look selfless, you gave to the charity because you wanted to help, and wanting to help is a want. Nobody has ever done anything for a reason that wasn't, at bottom, theirs. Which means, if you're asking a person to do something and you have not connected it to something they want, you are relying entirely on obligation, authority, or guilt. Those work, briefly, expensively, and with interest. Andrew Carnegie has a small story showing how ruthlessly precise this can get. He had 2 nephews at Yale, so busy they never wrote home, and their mother was frantic. Carnegie bet $100 he could get a reply by return mail without even asking for one. He wrote them a chatty letter and mentioned, in a casual postscript, that he was sending each of them a $5 bill. He didn't enclose the money. Replies came by return mail, thanking dear Uncle Andrew for his kind note, and you laughed. But look at what actually happened. He stopped transmitting his want, right to your mother, and connected to theirs. The letter didn't get answered because he was owed an answer. It got answered because there was a worm on the hook. Now the version that isn't a trick at all, and this is the one to keep. Henry Ford. If there is any one secret of success, it lies in the ability to get the other person's point of view and see things from that person's angle as well as from your own, as well as, not instead of. This is not self-erasure. You still want your thing. You're simply doing the work of finding where your want and their want overlap, and there is almost always an overlap. The reason we don't find it is that we never look, because looking takes 20 minutes and complaining takes none. There's a small example that shows the whole move. A man's son wouldn't eat and was underweight, and the parents did what parents do. Nagged. Mother wants you to eat this. Father wants you to grow up big and strong. Did the boy pay any attention to those pleas? About as much as you pay to a grain of sand on the beach. So the father finally asked a different question. What does this boy want? And what the boy wanted was to ride his tricycle down the street without a bigger neighborhood kid pulling him off it and riding it himself. So the father said, eat what your mother wants you to eat, and someday you'll be bigger than that boy. The eating problem vanished, not because the food changed, because the reason changed, from the parent's reason to the child's. And notice, nothing dishonest happened. It was all true. The father just stopped selling his own want and found the one already sitting in the room. Here's the practical form. Before you ask anyone for anything, ask yourself one question. How can I make this person want to do it? That question is annoying. It costs you the 20 minutes. And Carnegie's claim, after 15 years of watching adults test it on real customers and real spouses, is that those 20 minutes are the highest return minutes in the entire transaction, because they change the thing from a request into an offer. He tells about walking up and down in front of a man's office for 2 hours before going in, rather than walking in with only a clear idea of what he wanted. That pacing wasn't nerves, that was the work. And the summary line, which gives this chapter its enormous title. First, arouse in the other person an eager want. He who can do this has the whole world with him. He who cannot walks a lonely way. Now, I want to be honest about how this lands, because I know how it sounds if you're the one who has been asking politely for 2 years and getting nothing. It sounds like more work for the person already doing the work. That objection is real. The book doesn't fully answer it, and we'll come back to it at the end. But those are the 3 fundamentals. Don't criticize. Give honest appreciation. Arouse an eager want. That's how you handle people. The next 6 chapters are a different question entirely, how to make people genuinely like you. And Carnegie proves the first one using an animal with a brain the size of a walnut. Principle 3. Arouse in the other person an eager want. Part 2, Chapter 1. Do this and you'll be welcome anywhere. So I remember trying to network. Deliberately, as a project. I read the guides, went to the events, had the little goals, talked to 5 people, get 3 contacts. and I'd come home from those evenings feeling like I'd been mildly poisoned, and I could never work out why, because I'd done everything correctly. Carnegie explains it in one line, and it took me years to accept. You can make more friends in 2 months by becoming genuinely interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you. 2 months versus 2 years. 12 times the return from doing the opposite of what I was doing. And then he proves it with the most humbling example available. The world champion at this skill is an animal with a brain the size of a walnut. Carnegie had a dog, a little yellow-haired dog named Tippy, his companion for 5 years on the Missouri farm, until one afternoon Tippy was killed by lightning 10 feet from where he stood. He says it was the tragedy of his boyhood. But here's the observation about that dog. Tippy never read a book on psychology. He didn't need to. He knew by some divine instinct that you make more friends in 2 months by becoming interested in other people than in 2 years trying to get people interested in you. Think about how a dog actually operates. A dog makes a living by giving you nothing but love. He doesn't sell you real estate. He doesn't want anything from you. He never read the sales manual. And when he sees you coming, 60 yards away, 30, 10, his entire body reorganizes around the fact of your existence. Ears, tail, the whole animal. Nobody has ever taught a dog a technique, and every dog you have ever met has outperformed you socially on the first attempt every time. Because here's the mechanism, and it's slightly insulting. People don't respond to your interest in being liked. They respond to your interest in them. Those two feel similar from the inside and are completely different from the outside. And everyone can tell them apart, including 4-year-olds and dogs. Carnegie puts it darkly. If we merely try to impress people and get people interested in us, we will never have many true friends. That's not moralizing, it's mechanical. Impressing is a performance, and a performance needs an audience, and nobody enjoys being cast as an audience without being asked. Then the line I think about whenever I catch myself doing it. From the Viennese psychologist Alfred Adler, it is the individual who is not interested in his fellow men who has the greatest difficulties in life and provides the greatest injury to others. It is from among such individuals that all human failures spring. He isn't describing cruelty. He's describing indifference. Most of the damage in this world is done by people who simply weren't curious. And the proof that this is a real practice, and not just manners, is how ordinary the applications are. Birthdays. Carnegie kept a record of his friends' birthdays, and notes how enormous the effect of remembering one is relative to how nearly nothing it costs. The telephone. He suggests answering hello in a tone that says, you are delighted the person called. Because the effort travels down the line perfectly, and so does the absence of it. There's a story of a switchboard operator at a phone company whose greeting was so genuinely warm that customers went out of their way to say so. And another of a man who ran a busy shop and made a point of learning something real about each regular. Not to sell them more, but because he found them interesting, and they in turn kept the shop alive through a bad year. None of that is clever. That's the point. There is nothing clever in this chapter at all. Here's the honest test, and it's the one I failed for years. Walk out of your next conversation and ask yourself, what did I actually learn about that person that I didn't know an hour ago? Not their job title. Something real. What they're worried about, what they're pleased about, what they were doing before they got here. If the answer is nothing, then you weren't interested in them. You were interested in how you were doing. And the reason that matters isn't ethics, it's arithmetic. Everyone you meet is running the same hunger from the last chapter, all day, mostly unfed. Genuine interest is the cheapest, rarest thing you can hand them, and you cannot fake it for long. But you also don't have to. because almost everyone is genuinely interesting for at least 20 minutes if you actually look. Principle 1. Become genuinely interested in other people. Part 2. Chapter 2. A simple way to make a good first impression. I'll be honest, this is the chapter that made me roll my eyes hardest as a young man. Smile. Thanks, Dale. Revolutionary. Then I noticed what he actually says, which isn't smile. Actions speak louder than words, and a smile says, I like you. You make me happy. I am glad to see you. That's why dogs make such a hit, and Carnegie notes dryly why babies do. But here's the mechanism level point, and it's the reason this isn't a tip about your face. It is not the physical arrangement of the muscles. A phony grin is worse than nothing. People resent it, and they should. Carnegie says outright that a smile which isn't real doesn't fool anybody, that we know it's mechanical and we're offended by it. What he's describing is the internal state that produces the real one, which raises the obvious problem. What if you don't feel it? And here Carnegie reaches for something that was cutting-edge psychology in 1936 and has held up remarkably well. William James. Action seems to follow feeling, but really action and feeling go together. And by regulating the action, which is under the more direct control of the will, we can indirectly regulate the feeling, which is not. So the sovereign voluntary path to cheerfulness, if you've lost it, is to sit up cheerfully and act and speak as if it were already there. You don't wait to feel it and then act. You act, and the feeling follows the action home. Lincoln again. Most folks are about as happy as they make up their minds to be. Now the evidence, and it's the most quietly sad story in this section. A stockbroker in one of Carnegie's classes, married 18 years. And he admits that from the moment he got out of bed to the moment he left for work, he almost never smiled at his wife, barely spoke 24 words to her. So he's given the class assignment, smile at somebody every hour for a week. He starts with her, and 2 months later he reports that the change in his home was greater than in the whole of the previous 18 years. Then it spread. He smiled at the elevator operator, the doorman, the cashier in the subway booth, the men on the exchange floor, and he found people smiling back, found that people who came to him with complaints were easier to handle, found, his words, that smiling was bringing him money, a lot of it, every day. 18 years of marriage changed by a facial expression sounds absurd until you see what actually happened. The smile wasn't the cause, the smile was the evidence. It was proof, delivered daily, that he had started paying attention to her existence again. She wasn't responding to his mouth. She was responding to being noticed after 18 years. A few more because Carnegie stacks them. The Chinese proverb, a man without a smiling face must not open a shop. And a department store's Christmas advertisement, which is the sharpest version of it. It costs nothing, but creates much. It enriches those who receive, without impoverishing those who give. None are so rich they can get along without it, and none so poor but are richer for its benefits. And the practical instruction for when you genuinely have nothing. Force yourself to smile. If you're alone, force yourself to whistle or hum a tune or sing. Act as if you were already happy, and that will tend to make you happy. Is that self-deception? I don't think so. And here's why. You're not lying to yourself about your circumstances. You're refusing to let your circumstances have the last word on your behavior, which, if you were here for the last book, is habit 1 arriving from a completely different direction 50 years early. The thing I'd add, because it's what finally made me take this chapter seriously, every person you meet today is arriving from somewhere you can't see. They're carrying something, and the first quarter second of your face is the only data they have about whether this next interaction is going to cost them anything. That's what the smile actually is. It's not a technique for being liked. It's a message that says you're safe here. This won't be expensive, delivered before either of you has said a word. And you're sending some message in that quarter second, whether you choose to or not. Principle 2. Smile. Part 2. Chapter 3. If you don't do this, you are headed for trouble. Now imagine you're a 10-year-old boy in Missouri in the 1880s. Your father has just died in an accident with a horse, and your mother is left with 3 boys and a few $100s of insurance. You quit school. You go to work in a brickyard, making bricks and drying them in the sun. That boy, Jim Farley, never got past the 4th grade. And by the time he was 46, 4 universities had given him honorary degrees. He was chairman of the Democratic National Committee, and he was Postmaster General of the United States. In 1932, he ran the campaign that put Franklin Roosevelt in the White House. So Carnegie interviewed him and asked the secret of his success. Farley said, "Hard work," and Carnegie said, "Don't be funny." So Farley asked what he thought the reason was, and Carnegie said, "I understand you can call 10,000 people by their first names." And Farley corrected him, "No, you are wrong. I can call 50,000 people by their first names." 50,000. And here's how, because it's just a method. There's no gift involved. Whenever he met a new person, he learned their full name, the size of their family, the nature of their business, and the color of their politics. He made a picture of all of that in his mind, and the next time he met them, even a year later, he could slap them on the back, ask about the wife and the kids, and ask about the hollyhocks in the backyard. Edison had 100 assistants who would have taken a year to do what Farley did as a hobby. And a president got elected on it. Then Carnegie goes older with it. Napoleon III, nephew of the great Napoleon, boasted that despite all his royal duties, he could remember the name of every person he met. His technique? If he didn't hear it distinctly, he'd say, "So sorry, I didn't get the name clearly." If it was unusual, "How is it spelled?" During the conversation, he'd repeat it several times and try to associate it with the person's features, expression, general appearance. And if the person mattered, he'd go further. When alone, he'd write the name on a scrap of paper, look at it, concentrate on it, fix it, and then tear the paper up. An eye impression as well as an ear impression. Notice what's hiding in plain sight. He was an emperor. A man with unlimited demands on his attention, tearing up little scraps of paper with strangers' names on them, because he had worked out that the return was enormous. So why does it work at all? Carnegie's explanation is the sharp bit. A person's name is, to that person, the sweetest and most important sound in any language, because it's the one word in the world that belongs entirely to them. It sets them apart. It makes them unique among everybody else. Information we're handing over takes on a special importance when we attach the name of the individual to it. A request becomes personal, a thank you becomes real, a greeting stops being a formality. And the reverse of it is what happens most of the time. We don't forget names because we have bad memories. We forget them because we didn't spend the attention in the 4 seconds when it was offered. We were busy thinking about what we'd say next. Carnegie is blunt. Most people don't remember names for the simple reason that they don't take the time and energy necessary to concentrate and repeat and fix names indelibly in their minds. They make excuses for themselves. They are too busy. Busier than the Emperor of France? That one stopped me because it was exactly what I'd been telling myself. "I'm terrible with names" is a sentence I said for about 15 years, and it was never a fact about my brain. It was a description of where I was pointing my attention in the first 4 seconds of meeting a person, which was at myself. Carnegie also traces where the hunger under this comes from, and it goes further than politeness. Andrew Carnegie again. As a boy in Scotland, he caught a rabbit and discovered the rabbit was about to have a litter, and he had nothing to feed them, so he made the neighborhood children an offer. If they'd go out and pull enough clover and dandelions to feed the rabbits, he'd name a rabbit after each of them. The plan worked like magic, and he never forgot it. Years later, he made millions using the same psychology on grown men. He wanted to sell steel rails to the Pennsylvania Railroad, whose president was J. Edgar Thompson. So he built a huge steel mill in Pittsburgh and named it the Edgar Thompson Steel Works. Now, here's the test. When the Pennsylvania Railroad needed steel rails, where do you suppose Thompson bought them? And later, when Carnegie and George Pullman were in a brutal fight over the sleeping car business, undercutting each other into ruin, Carnegie proposed a merger. Pullman was skeptical and asked what the new company would be called. Carnegie said instantly, "The Pullman Palace Car Company." Pullman's face lit up. "Come into my room," he said. "Let's talk it over." That conversation made industrial history, and it turned on a name. The practical instruction is unglamorous, and it's the whole chapter. When you're introduced, actually listen. Ask how it's spelled if you're unsure. People are pleased, not annoyed. Use it 2 or 3 times in the conversation. Associate it with the face. And if it matters, write it down afterward. 4 seconds of attention that you're currently spending on yourself. Principle 3. Remember that a person's name is, to that person, the sweetest and most important sound in any language. Part 2. Chapter 4. An easy way to become a good conversationalist. Now imagine you're at a dinner party in New York, thrown by a book publisher, and you get seated next to a botanist. A botanist? You have never spoken to a botanist in your life. And Carnegie says he sat on the edge of his chair, fascinated, and listened while this man talked about hashish and Luther Burbank and indoor gardens and the humble potato for hours. He asked questions. He said almost nothing about himself. At midnight he said goodnight to everyone and left. And the botanist then turned to the host and paid Carnegie a series of compliments. He was most stimulating. He was this, he was that. And he finished by calling him a most interesting conversationalist. An interesting conversationalist. Carnegie had barely said anything. In his own words, I had said hardly anything at all. I couldn't have said anything if I had wanted to without changing the subject. For I didn't know any more about botany than I knew about the anatomy of a penguin. But I had listened intently. I had listened because I was genuinely interested. And he felt it. Then the line that should be printed on the inside of everyone's eyelids. Exclusive attention to the person who is speaking to you is very important. Nothing else is so flattering as that. Why does listening beat brilliance? The reason is almost mathematical, and Carnegie states it without flinching. The other person is 100 times more interested in themselves and their wants and their problems than they are in you and yours. Their toothache means more to them than a famine in China that kills 1 million people. A boil on their neck interests them more than 40 earthquakes in Africa. Think of that the next time you start a conversation, and that isn't cynicism, it's equally true of you. Once you accept it about yourself, you stop taking it personally in other people, and you can finally use it. Carnegie's diagnosis of why most people fail at conversation is uncomfortable. Many fail to make a favorable impression because they don't listen attentively. They've been so concerned with what they're going to say next that they don't keep their ears open. Very important people, he says, have told him they prefer good listeners to good talkers. But the ability to listen seems rarer than almost any other good trait. He also gives the counter recipe, and it's the one I recognize in myself on a bad day. If you want to know how to make people shun you and laugh at you behind your back and even despise you, here it is. Never listen to anyone for long. Talk incessantly about yourself, and if you have an idea while the other person is talking, don't wait for them to finish. Break in and interrupt in the middle of a sentence. Do you know people like that? Carnegie says, I unfortunately do, and the astonishing part is that some of them are prominent. His word for them, bores, are people intoxicated with themselves, drunk with the exhilaration of their own self-importance. Now, the two stories that show the size of the effect. The first is a customer complaint. A man had been sold defective cloth at a department store, or believed he had, and came in furious, having been refused a refund 3 times. He was shouting, threatening never to return, and a manager simply let him talk. Let him run all the way out, didn't defend the store, didn't correct a single point. Then thanked him for coming in, said that if the cloth was unsatisfactory, the store certainly wanted to know, admitted the store had been wrong, and offered to take it back or replace it. The man left having been given exactly what he came for, and the interesting part is that once he'd been fully heard, he decided the cloth was probably fine after all and kept it. The second is a job interview, and it's the one that made this click for me. A woman applies to a firm and gets the job. Later she asks the manager why. He tells her, at the interview when I asked what you'd been doing, you told me about your previous job for a few minutes, and then you asked me about the company and you listened. Every other applicant told me about themselves for 45 minutes. Even at a job interview, the one situation on earth where you'd swear talking about yourself is literally the assignment. And the person who listened won. The other half of this chapter, which people skip. Listening isn't passive. Carnegie's instruction is to ask questions the other person will enjoy answering. Encourage them to talk about themselves and their accomplishments. Remember that the person you're talking to is 100 times more interested in their own toothache than in your famine. So the skill has 2 moving parts. Shut up and then aim. And one honest warning, because I've been on the receiving end of the counterfeit. Listening as a technique while you wait for your turn is detectable. It has a specific feel, the nodding is slightly too regular, and the follow-up question lands 1 beat late because it was assembled while you were still speaking. What made the botanist say, most interesting conversationalist, wasn't the sitting quietly. It was that Carnegie actually wanted to know about the potato. Principle 4. Be a good listener. Encourage others to talk about themselves. Part 2. Chapter 5. How to interest people. Now imagine you're 8 years old at your aunt's house and a middle-aged man comes to visit one evening. After being polite with your aunt, he turns his attention to you. And you happen to be obsessed with boats. And this man talks about boats with you. In a way that is completely, thrillingly interesting. After he leaves, you say to your aunt, "What a man!" And your aunt says, "That's a New York lawyer. He cares nothing whatever about boats. He takes not the slightest interest in the subject." And the boy says, "But why then did he talk all the time about boats?" And the aunt says, "Because he is a gentleman. He saw you were interested in boats, and he talked about the things he knew would interest and please you. He made himself agreeable." The boy was William Lyon Phelps, who grew up to be a beloved professor of literature at Yale. He said he never forgot that remark. Now I want to stop here, because this is exactly the spot where this book gets uncomfortable, and I'm not going to skate past it. The lawyer was faking an interest in boats. Is that manipulation? Here's the distinction, and it runs under this entire book. He wasn't faking an interest in the boy. That part was real. The boats were the door. The child was the point. That's the difference between a gentleman and an operator. And it isn't detectable in the transcript only in the motive. Which is exactly why this book cannot save you if your motive is bad. It can only make you more effective at whatever your motive already is. Theodore Roosevelt did the same thing at scale, and his version shows the price. Everyone who visited Roosevelt was astonished at the range of his knowledge. Whether the visitor was a cowboy or a rough rider, a New York politician or a diplomat, Roosevelt knew what to say. How? He sat up late the night before, reading up on the subject he knew his guest was particularly interested in. He sat up late. The President of the United States did homework on you before you came over. That is what separates this from a trick. Fake interest costs nothing and is worth nothing. This cost him sleep. And Roosevelt knew, as all leaders know, that the royal road to a person's heart is to talk about the things they treasure most. Then the payoff story, which is almost comic in its return on investment. Edward Shalliff was active in Boy Scout work, and he needed a favor. A big jamboree was coming up in Europe, and he wanted the president of one of America's largest corporations to pay the expenses of one of his boys. Just before he went in, Shalliff heard something. This man had once drawn a check for $1 million, and after it was cancelled, he'd had it framed. So the first thing Shalliff did on entering the office was ask to see the check. He'd never known anyone who had written a check that large, he said, and he wanted to be able to tell his boys he'd seen it. The man was delighted. He showed it to him. He told him the whole story of it. Notice what Shalliff did not do. He didn't begin by talking about the Boy Scouts, or the jamboree, or what he wanted. He talked about what interested the other man. And the result, the executive didn't fund one boy. He funded 5, plus Shalliff himself, gave them letters of credit, told them to enjoy 7 weeks in Europe, and provided introductions to his branch executives to help them along the way. Shalliff went in asking for 1 trip and came out with 7 weeks and a network, because he spent the first 5 minutes on a framed check. Carnegie has one more, smaller and more human. A man who ran a bakery had failed for 4 years to sell bread to a particular New York hotel. He called on the manager every week. He went to the hotel's functions. He even took a room there to try to force the sale. Nothing. Then he studied the man instead of the account, and found he was an enthusiastic member of a hotel greeters association, so passionate about it that his eyes lit up the moment it came up. So on the next visit, the baker asked about the association. Nothing about bread. And he got 20 minutes of vibrating enthusiasm, a membership pitch, and a warm goodbye. A few days later, the hotel's steward phoned and asked him to send over samples and prices. The steward's words, "I don't know what you did to the old boy, but he sure is sold on you." 4 years of pushing, and the thing that moved it was one conversation that had nothing to do with bread. The practical form is simple and expensive. Find out what they care about, then do the work before you show up. Not to have something to say, so that you actually have something to ask. Principle 5. Talk in terms of the other person's interests. Part 2. Chapter 6. How to make people like you instantly. This is the chapter that gathers up the other 5, and Carnegie stakes a big claim on it. There is one all-important law of human conduct, he says, and if we obey it, we shall almost never get into trouble. It is this: always make the other person feel important. John Dewey said the deepest urge in human nature is the desire to be important. William James said the deepest principle is the craving to be appreciated. It's the same gnawing, unfaltering hunger from part 1. And Carnegie says that if you can honestly satisfy it, you will hold people in the palm of your hand. Even the undertaker, he adds, will be sorry when you die. Then he gives it the form that turns it from a tactic into a principle. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. Because what do you want? You want to feel important in your own little world. You don't want cheap, insincere flattery. You crave sincere appreciation. You want your friends and associates to be, as Schwab said, hearty in their approbation and lavish in their praise. All of us want that, so let's obey the golden rule and give unto others what we'd have others give unto us. How? When? Where? The answer is all the time, everywhere. And the practical form is much smaller than you'd expect. Little phrases. I'm sorry to trouble you. Would you be so kind as to? Won't you please? Would you mind? Thank you. Little courtesies that oil the cogs of the monotonous grind of everyday life, and incidentally are the hallmark of good breeding. That's it. That's the whole technology. Here's the story that shows the return, and it's my favorite in the book. Carnegie is in a post office, standing in line, and he notices the clerk is bored to death with the job. Weighing envelopes, handing out stamps, making change year after year. So Carnegie says to himself, I'm going to make that fellow like me. And to make him like me, I must say something nice about him, not about myself. So he looks at the man and says, with genuine feeling, I certainly wish I had your head of hair. The clerk looks up, half surprised, his face beaming with smiles. Well, it isn't as good as it used to be, he says modestly. Carnegie assures him it's magnificent. The man is immensely pleased. They have a pleasant little conversation, and the last thing he says is, Many people have admired my hair. And Carnegie will bet that man went out to lunch that day walking on air. Went home and told his wife about it. Looked in the mirror and said, It is a beautiful head of hair. Now here's the part that matters. When Carnegie told that story once in public, a man came up afterward and asked him, What did you want to get out of him? What was I trying to get out of him? And Carnegie's answer is what separates this book from every cheap version of it. If we are so contemptibly selfish that we can't radiate a little happiness and pass on a bit of honest appreciation without trying to get something out of the other person in return, if our souls are no bigger than sour crab apples, we shall meet with the failure we so richly deserve. Nothing. He wanted nothing. That's the entire point of the story, and the man in the audience couldn't hear it, which tells you how rare it actually is. Carnegie stacks a few more, and they're all about the same move, finding the importance in a person who isn't being given any. There's a woman who, at a crowded reception, kept trying to impress a well-known man until she asked him instead about himself, and he talked for an hour and left telling the hostess she was a most stimulating conversationalist. There's a lawyer who, before a big case, was standing beside an elderly man and simply asked him about his life and got told a story about lugging cabbages to market, and got, later, exactly the help he needed. And there's the small one I think about most, a man who noticed the woman behind a counter looked exhausted and said something kind about how well she'd handled a difficult customer. Nothing was gained. He never went back. The common thread, each of them found a person whose importance nobody was feeding, and fed it without a bill attached. Emerson closes it, and it's the sentence to keep. Every man I meet is my superior in some way. In that, I learn of him. Not everyone deserves respect. That's easier and weaker. Superior in some way. Which means the posture isn't charity, it's curiosity. What does this person know or do or endure better than I do? There's always an answer, and the moment you actually look for it, the importance you hand them stops being a technique, because it's true. So, 6 ways to make people like you. Become genuinely interested. Smile. Remember names. Listen. Talk about their interests. Make them feel important, sincerely. Notice what is not on that list. Not one of them is about being impressive. Not one is about what you say. 5 of the 6 are about attention, where you point it, and how much of it you're willing to spend on somebody who isn't you. But being liked isn't the whole job. Eventually you're going to disagree with someone who matters. And that's the next 12 chapters, which open with Carnegie throwing away the one thing most of us think we're good at. Principle 6. Make the other person feel important, and do it sincerely. Part 3. Chapter 1. You can't win an argument. Now imagine you're at a banquet in London, sitting next to a man telling a story, and he quotes a line and says it comes from the Bible. And you know he's wrong. You know it cold. That line is from Shakespeare, Hamlet. You are absolutely, verifiably, checkably correct, so you tell him. And he pushes back. No, it's the Bible. Certainly. Now, sitting on your other side is an old friend who has spent years studying Shakespeare. Actual years, so you both agree to put it to him, and you kick your friend under the table and say, settle it. And your friend listens, kicks you back under the table and says, Dale, you are wrong. The gentleman is quite right. It is from the Bible. On the way home, you turn to him. Frank, you knew that quotation was from Hamlet. And he says, yes, of course, Hamlet, Act 5, Scene 2. But we were guests at a festive occasion, my dear Dale. Why prove to a man he is wrong? Is that going to make him like you? Why not let him save his face? He didn't ask for your opinion. He didn't want it. Why argue with him? And then the line Carnegie carried for the rest of his life. Always avoid the acute angle. Carnegie learned this the hard way, and he tells on himself. He'd been an argumentative young man. He studied debate, he taught it, he planned to write a book about it. And after that banquet, and hundreds of arguments after it, he came to one conclusion. There is only one way under high heaven to get the best of an argument, and that is to avoid it. Avoid it as you would avoid rattlesnakes and earthquakes. Here's the reason, and it's the sentence that ended my own relationship with winning arguments. 9 times out of 10, an argument ends with each of the contestants more firmly convinced than ever that he is absolutely right. You cannot win an argument. You can't. If you lose it, you lose it. And if you win it, you lose it too. Why? Suppose you triumph over the other man, shoot his argument full of holes, and prove that he is non compos mentis. Then what? You'll feel fine. But what about him? You have made him feel inferior. You've hurt his pride. He'll resent your triumph. And a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. Everyone nods at that, and nobody believes it about their own arguments. So make it concrete. Think of a specific argument you won. A real one. You had the facts, you laid them out, and the other person had nothing left to say. Now, did they change? Did their behavior in the following months reflect your victory? Or did they go quiet, and did something in the relationship get a little colder? And did they, at some later date, do the exact thing you'd argued them out of? I have never once, not one time in my life, won an argument and gotten the outcome. I've gotten the verdict. Those are different products, and I kept buying the wrong one. There's an insurance man in the book, Patrick O'Hare, an Irishman with little schooling who loved a fight. He'd been a chauffeur, then he tried selling trucks, and he was a flop. Because when a customer said his trucks were no good, Pat would get hot and win the argument. He'd come back to the office saying, "I told that bird something." And his boss would say, "But how much money did you collect?" That's the whole thing in one exchange. "I told that bird something." And how much money did you collect? O'Hare ended up a star salesman for the White Motor Company. And here's what changed. When a customer said, "What, a white truck? They're no good. I wouldn't take one as a gift. I'm going to buy the Woosit truck. The old Pat would have gone red. The new Pat said, Brother, listen, the Woosit truck is a good truck. If you buy the Woosit, you'll never make a mistake. The Woosits are made by a fine company and sold by good people. And the customer has nothing to say. There's no argument to have. He can't spend the afternoon insisting the Woosit is best while Pat agrees with him. So they get off the subject, and Pat starts talking about the good points of the white. Buddha. Hatred is never ended by hatred, but by love. And a misunderstanding is never ended by an argument, but by tact, diplomacy, conciliation, and a sympathetic desire to see the other person's viewpoint. So practically, what do you do instead? Carnegie's list is worth having in full. Welcome the disagreement. If two partners always agree, one of them is unnecessary. If there's a point you hadn't considered, be thankful it's been brought to your attention. Distrust your first instinctive impression. Our first natural reaction in a disagreeable situation is to be defensive. Keep calm and watch your first reaction. It may be you at your worst, not your best. Control your temper. You can measure the size of a person by what makes them angry. Listen first. Give your opponents a chance to talk. Let them finish. Don't resist, defend, or debate. That only raises barriers. Look for areas of agreement. When you've heard them out, dwell first on the points where you agree. Be honest. Look for places where you can admit error and say so. Apologize for your mistakes. It disarms your opponents and reduces defensiveness. Promise to think over their ideas and actually do it. They may be right. It is far easier to agree to think about it than to charge ahead and end up somewhere they get to say, "We tried to tell you and you wouldn't listen." Thank them sincerely for their interest. Anyone who takes the time to disagree with you is interested in the same things you are. Think of them as people who genuinely want to help. And postpone action. Give both sides time to think the problem through. Notice how much of that is simply slowing the clock down. Almost nothing on the list is clever. It's just refusing to have the fight at the speed the fight wants to happen. Principle 1. The only way to get the best of an argument is to avoid it. Part 3. Chapter 2. A Sure Way of Making Enemies and How to Avoid It. Theodore Roosevelt once confessed that if he could be right 75% of the time, he would reach the highest measure of his expectation. 75. From one of the most distinguished men of the 20th century. So Carnegie asks the reasonable follow-up, what about you and me? And then he does the arithmetic that I find genuinely funny and genuinely humbling. If you can be sure of being right only 55% of the time, you can go down to Wall Street and make $1 million a day. And if you can't be sure of being right even 55% of the time, why are you telling other people they're wrong? Here's the mechanism. You can tell people they're wrong with a look, an intonation, or a gesture just as eloquently as with words. And if you tell them they're wrong, do you make them want to agree with you? Never. Because you have struck a direct blow at their intelligence, their judgment, their pride, and their self-respect. That makes them want to strike back. It will never make them want to change their minds. You may then hurl at them all the logic of a Plato or an Immanuel Kant, and you will not alter their opinion because you have hurt their feelings. Never begin by announcing, I am going to prove so-and-so to you. That's tantamount to saying, I'm smarter than you. I'm going to tell you a thing or two and make you change your mind. That's a challenge. It arouses opposition and makes the listener want to battle you before you've even started. It is difficult under even the most benign conditions to change people's minds. So why make it harder? Why handicap yourself? If you're going to prove anything, don't let anybody know it. Do it so subtly, so adroitly, that no one feels you're doing it. Alexander Pope, men must be taught as if you taught them not, and things unknown proposed as things forgot. Galileo 300 years before. You cannot teach a man anything, you can only help him to find it within himself. Lord Chesterfield to his son. Be wiser than other people if you can, but do not tell them so. Now the replacement, and this is the practical heart of the chapter, and it genuinely changes rooms. Instead of, "You're wrong," you say, "Well now look. I thought otherwise, but I may be wrong. I frequently am. And if I am wrong, I want to be put right. Let's examine the facts." Nobody on earth will object to that sentence. Nobody. There is no counter move to "I may be wrong. I frequently am." Let's examine the facts, and watch what it does mechanically. The other person's guard comes down because there's nothing to defend against. And now, for the first time, they can actually look at the facts. Because looking at the facts is no longer the same thing as losing. That's the whole trick, and it isn't a trick. You removed the cost of being persuaded. Carnegie's rule of thumb underneath it. Few people are logical. Most of us are prejudiced and biased, blighted with preconceived notions, jealousy, suspicion, fear, envy, and pride. And when we're wrong, we may admit it to ourselves. And if handled gently and tactfully, we may admit it to others. And even take a certain pride in our own frankness and broad-mindedness. But not if someone is trying to ram the unpalatable fact down our esophagus. He also quotes a line from James Harvey Robinson that names the real problem precisely. We sometimes find ourselves changing our minds without any resistance or heavy emotion. But if we are told we are wrong, we resent the imputation and harden our hearts. We are incredibly heedless in the formation of our beliefs, but find ourselves filled with an illicit passion for them when anyone proposes to rob us of their companionship. It is obviously not the ideas themselves that are dear to us, but our self-esteem, which is threatened. That little word "my" is the most important one in human affairs. My dinner, my dog, my faith, my country. We resent the suggestion that our watch is cheap or our car shabby, and just as much the suggestion that our idea about anything is mistaken. We like to continue believing what we have been accustomed to accept as true. And the resentment aroused when anyone questions, it leads us to seek every manner of excuse for clinging to it. Most of what we call reasoning consists in finding arguments for going on, believing as we already do. One story shows the cost of getting this wrong, even when you're technically right. A man was inspecting a shipment of oak that had been rejected by a customer's inspector as below grade. The customer was angry, the truckload was ready to be sent back, and the money was on the line. He did not argue. He asked the inspector to keep rejecting the pieces he thought unsatisfactory, and to explain why, and simply asked questions about the standard being applied. He was careful, all the way through, never to suggest the inspector was wrong. And gradually, as the inspector explained his own reasoning aloud, he began to see that his interpretation was too strict. And on his own, without being told, he came around. The entire shipment was accepted. Nothing was won by argument. It was won by making it safe for a man to change his mind in front of somebody else. Principle 2. Show respect for the other person's opinions. Never say, "You're wrong." Part 3, Chapter 3. If you're wrong, admit it. Now imagine you're walking a big dog in a park where dogs are supposed to be leashed and muzzled. And you're doing neither because your dog is friendly and the park is empty. And a policeman catches you. Carnegie tells this one on himself. The first time, the officer scolds him. He apologizes, promises. Then he does it again. The dog didn't like the muzzle, and neither did he. And this time he's caught red-handed by the same officer, with the dog running ahead of him, so he doesn't wait. He doesn't make excuses. He beats the officer to it. "Officer, you've caught me red-handed. I'm guilty. I have no alibis, no excuses. You warned me last week that if I brought the dog out here again without a muzzle, you'd fine me." And the officer, in a soft tone, says, "Well now, I know it's a temptation to let a little dog like that run out here when there's nobody around." And Carnegie says, "Yes, it's a temptation, but it's against the law." And the officer says the dog probably won't hurt anybody. And Carnegie says, "No, but he may kill squirrels." And the officer tells him he's taking this too seriously. "Take him over the hill, where I can't see him, and we'll forget the whole thing." Watch what happened there. Carnegie kept arguing for the prosecution, and the policeman kept arguing for the defense. The roles swapped completely. And the reason is that policemen, being human, wanted a feeling of importance. So when Carnegie began condemning himself, the only way left for the officer to nourish his own self-esteem was to be magnanimous and show mercy. Here's the principle. Say about yourself all the derogatory things you know the other person is thinking, or wants to say, and say them before that person has a chance to say them. The chances are 100 to 1 that a generous, forgiving attitude will be taken and your mistakes minimized. And there's a real fight involved. Any fool can try to defend his mistakes, and most fools do. But it raises one above the herd and gives one a feeling of nobility and exaltation to admit one's mistakes. Carnegie gives a commercial artist's version. A man who'd irritated a difficult art buyer by defending a rejected drawing, and who went back and said, in effect, "You've been doing business with me for years, and I've obviously failed to give you what you need. I'd like you to tell me where I've gone wrong." The buyer, disarmed, gave him the work and a new assignment. And there's Elbert Hubbard's version of it, which Carnegie clearly relishes. When readers wrote him furious letters, he'd reply that on thinking it over, he didn't entirely agree with that piece himself, that not everything he wrote yesterday appealed to him today. And would they come and see him next time they were in town? What can a man say to a man like that? Now, why does this work so reliably? Because of the thing we established in the very first chapter. Everyone is defending a self-image. When you criticize someone, they defend. But when you criticize yourself, there's nothing left for them to do. The prosecution has rested before it started, and the only role remaining in the room is defense attorney. And people will take that role on your behalf almost automatically. It surprised me the first time I used it deliberately. I went into a conversation expecting to be taken apart, opened by naming my own failure completely and without qualification, and watched the other person spend the next 5 minutes explaining to me why it wasn't that bad. There's an old proverb Carnegie leans on. By fighting you never get enough, but by yielding you get more than you expected. One caution I'd add, because the counterfeit here is nasty. There's a version of this that's a move, the preemptive self-criticism, performed to harvest reassurance. "I'm so bad at this. I always ruin everything," said to make somebody rush in and disagree. Everyone has met it. It's exhausting, and it's the opposite of what Carnegie is describing, because it isn't admission, it's fishing. The real thing has a specific feel. It's specific, it's complete, and it doesn't reach for anything. You warned me last week, and I did it anyway. No adjectives about his character, no bid for sympathy, nothing requested. Say the true bad thing plainly, and then stop talking. Principle 3. If you are wrong, admit it quickly and emphatically. Part 3, Chapter 4, A Drop of Honey. Woodrow Wilson said it as plainly as it can be said. If you come at me with your fists doubled, I think I can promise you that mine will double as fast as yours. But if you come to me and say, let us sit down and take counsel together, and if we differ from one another, understand why it is that we differ, just what the points at issue are, we will presently find that we are not so far apart after all. And Lincoln's version is the one to memorize because it's older and simpler. A drop of honey catches more flies than a gallon of gall. So with men, if you would win a man to your cause, first convince him that you are his sincere friend. Therein is a drop of honey that catches his heart, which, say what you will, is the great highroad to his reason. The great highroad to his reason. Note the order, not reason first. You go through the heart to get to the head, and there is no other route. Then Aesop, because Carnegie can't resist a fable. The sun and the wind quarrel about which is stronger, and the wind says, I'll prove I am. See that old man with a coat? I'll get his coat off him faster than you. So the sun goes behind a cloud, and the wind blows, almost to a hurricane. And the harder it blows, the tighter the old man clutches his coat around him. Then the wind calms down, and the sun comes out and smiles on the old man. And presently he mops his brow and pulls off his coat. Gentleness and friendliness are always stronger than fury and force. Carnegie's big illustration of this is John D. Rockefeller Jr. in 1915, in the middle of the most violent strike in American industrial history. Colorado, 2 terrible years. Rockefeller's company had been forced to raise wages at gunpoint, property destroyed, troops called out, blood spilled. Rockefeller was the most fiercely hated man in the state, and he wanted to win the strikers over. And he did it with a speech, a masterpiece, delivered to the strikers' representatives. And the striking thing about it is what's in the opening. It's friendly from the first sentence to the last. He tells them this is a red-letter day in his life, the first time he's had the good fortune to meet the representatives of the employees, the officers and superintendents together. That he's proud to be there and will remember the gathering as long as he lives. That had it been held 2 weeks earlier, he'd have been a stranger to most of them, but having visited the camps and talked with nearly all of the representatives personally, he is here not as a stranger, but as a friend. He is speaking to men who had wanted to hang him from a tree. And he opens as though addressing a group of missionaries. The result? The strike ended, the men went back to work. And they didn't say another word about the wage increases they had been fighting so violently to get. Not because he beat them, because he stopped being the wind. There's a smaller one that shows the same physics in domestic life, and this is where most of us actually live. A man had a dispute with his landlord. He wanted out of a lease, and the landlord was unwilling and unpleasant about it. He'd been ready to go in swinging. Instead, he began by telling the landlord honestly how much he had liked the building and how well it had been managed, and that he'd have loved to stay another year, but genuinely couldn't afford it. The landlord, who by his own account had never had a tenant say anything of the sort, softened completely, and ended up asking what the man could pay, then reducing the rent to keep him. He got a better outcome than he'd have got by winning. I like this chapter because it asks nothing clever of you. It doesn't require a technique or a script. It asks you to change the first 15 seconds. And that's the practical finding underneath it. Most conversations are decided before anybody has said anything of substance. The opening tone sets a ceiling on how good the outcome can be, and everything after it is just filling in the space under that ceiling. You can be completely right, with excellent evidence, and if you open like the wind, you have already capped the result. Principle 4. Begin in a friendly way. Part 3. Chapter 5. The Secret of Socrates. In talking with people, don't begin by discussing the things on which you differ. Begin by emphasizing, and keep on emphasizing, the things on which you agree. Keep emphasizing, if possible, that you're both striving for the same end and that your only difference is one of method, not purpose. Get the other person saying, yes, yes, at the outset. Keep them, if possible, from saying no. And the reason isn't vibes, it's physiology, and Carnegie takes it from Professor Harry Overstreet. A no response is a most difficult handicap to overcome. When you say no, all your pride of personality demands that you remain consistent with yourself. You may later feel the no was ill-advised. Nevertheless, there is your precious pride to consider. Once having said a thing, you feel you must stick to it. And it isn't only psychological. The whole neuromuscular system sets itself on guard against acceptance. The entire organism withdraws into a state of rejection. Whereas when a person says yes, there is no withdrawing. The organism goes forward in an accepting, open attitude. So the more yeses we can induce at the outset, the more likely we are to succeed in capturing attention for our ultimate proposal. It's a simple technique, the yes response, and Carnegie's complaint is that it's so neglected. People often seem to get a sense of their own importance by antagonizing others at the outset. Here's it working, in the least promising possible setting: a bank. James Eberson was a teller. A man came in to open an account, and Eberson gave him the usual form. He answered some questions readily and flatly refused others. Under the old approach, Eberson would have told him that if he refused to give the information, the bank couldn't accept his deposit. And he admits why he used to enjoy that. It made him feel important. It told the man that the bank's rules could not be flouted. But that attitude, he realized, certainly didn't give a feeling of welcome and importance to the person who'd walked in with money. So he decided to use some common sense, to talk about what the customer wanted rather than what the bank wanted. And above all, to get him saying yes, yes from the beginning. So he agreed with him. He said the information wasn't absolutely essential. Then, but suppose you had money in this bank at the time of your death. Wouldn't you like to have us transfer it to your next of kin, entitled to it according to law? Yes, of course. Don't you think it would be a good idea to give us the name of your next of kin, so that in the event of your death we could carry out your wishes without error or delay? Yes again, and the young man's whole attitude softened and changed once he understood the information wasn't being demanded for the bank's sake. It was for his own. Before he left, he not only gave the complete information, he opened a trust account with his mother as beneficiary and answered every question about her too. Nothing was extracted, the same information was volunteered in full plus more, because the frame changed from our rules to your wishes. There's a second one that's even simpler. A salesman for an engine company had a customer who complained the engines ran too hot to touch. The old move would be to argue about specifications. Instead, he agreed, said that if the engines were running too hot, the customer certainly shouldn't buy any more. Yes. Then he asked whether the National Electrical Manufacturers Association standard allowed engines to run a certain number of degrees above room temperature. Yes. And what was the temperature of the factory floor? About 75, so if you add the allowed rise to 75, you get something well above what a hand can bear. Wouldn't it be a pretty good idea to keep your hand off them? He had to agree, and the conversation ended not in a dispute about engineering, but in a further order. And then Carnegie names the ancestor of the whole technique, which is the best joke in the chapter, because this is 24 centuries old. Socrates. The Socratic method is built entirely on getting a yes, yes response. He asked questions with which his opponent would have to agree. He kept winning one admission after another until he had an armful of yeses. He kept asking questions until finally, almost without realizing it, his opponents found themselves embracing a conclusion they would have bitterly denied a few minutes previously. The barefoot old man of Athens, who did one of the most spectacular things ever accomplished in changing human thought, and his entire method was refusing to tell anyone they were wrong. The Chinese proverb Carnegie leaves it with is the one to carry out. He who treads softly goes far. Principle 5. Get the other person saying yes, yes immediately. Part 3. Chapter 6. The Safety Valve in Handling Complaints. Most people trying to win others to their way of thinking do too much talking themselves. Let the other people talk themselves out. They know more about their business and their problems than you do, so ask them questions. Let them tell you a few things. If you disagree with them, you may be tempted to interrupt. Don't. It's dangerous. They won't pay attention to you while they still have a lot of ideas of their own crying for expression. So listen patiently and with an open mind. Be sincere about it. Encourage them to express their ideas fully. The title is The Mechanism, a Safety Valve. Pressure that isn't released doesn't disappear. It goes somewhere worse, and Carnegie has a story that shows what the valve is actually worth in money. An automobile manufacturer was negotiating for a year's supply of upholstery fabrics. 3 important manufacturers had worked up samples, all inspected by the executives, and each was invited to make a final presentation. One of the salesmen arrived with a severe case of laryngitis. He could barely whisper. He was shown into a room with the engineer, the purchasing agent, the sales director, and the president. He stood up, tried to speak, and could only squeak. So he wrote on a pad, "Gentlemen, I have lost my voice. I am speechless." And the president said, "I'll do the talking for you." And he did. He displayed the man's samples and praised their good points. A lively discussion broke out about the merits of the goods, and because the salesman couldn't talk, the president took the salesman's side in the argument. The salesman's only participation was smiles, nods, and a few gestures. He got the contract. 500,000 yards of upholstery fabric, $160,000 in orders, the biggest of his life, and his own conclusion is the part that matters. "I know I would have lost that contract if I hadn't lost my voice, because I had the wrong idea about the whole proposition. I discovered quite by accident how richly it sometimes pays to let the other person do the talking." Then there's the fatherly one, which lands closer to home. A man's daughter was doing badly, and he'd been doing what fathers do, telling, warning, correcting. And what changed things was that he finally asked her what she wanted, and then simply listened, without cutting in, and discovered that what he'd been treating as defiance was mostly something she'd never had room to say out loud. And there's a man who'd been passed over at work and had assembled a furious case for why it was unfair, and in the actual meeting was asked what he thought and given the space to say all of it. He talked himself calm. What he'd rehearsed as a resignation turned into a plan. Carnegie also gives the warning attached to it, and it's aimed straight at how we behave with people we love. La Rochefoucauld, "If you want enemies, excel your friends, but if you want friends, let your friends excel you." Why is that true? Because when our friends excel us, they feel important. But when we excel them, they, or at least some of them, will feel inferior and envious. So when we have a triumph to report, and the person across from us has been waiting to report theirs, the generous move is to ask first. Most people are so hungry to be heard that being asked genuinely lands as a gift. And there's a practical rule buried in this chapter that I've found more useful than almost anything else in the book. When someone comes to you angry, your only job for the first few minutes is to not stop them, not to fix it, not to explain, not to correct the 2 factual errors in their 3rd sentence. Just let the pressure out all the way until they've finished, and only then start. because a person mid-grievance is not able to hear you. They are full, and every sentence you insert extends the process, because now they have to re-argue the point you interrupted. Let them empty. Then talk. Principle 6. Let the other person do a great deal of the talking. Part 3, Chapter 7, How to Get Cooperation. Here's a question to start with. Do you have more faith in ideas you discover for yourself, or in ideas handed to you on a silver platter? You know the answer, and if that's the answer, Carnegie asks, isn't it bad judgment to try to ram your opinions down other people's throats? Isn't it wiser to make suggestions and let the other person think out the conclusion? He tells about a man who'd been trying to sell automobile show sketches to a buyer in Manhattan and had called on him every week for 3 years. The buyer would look at the sketches and say, "No, I don't think we can do business today." 150 visits, nothing. So the salesman tried something else. He grabbed a half-dozen unfinished sketches, rushed to the buyer's office and said, "I want you to do me a little favor, if you will. Here are some uncompleted sketches. Won't you please tell me how we could finish them up in such a way that you could use them?" The buyer looked at them without a word and said, "Leave these with me for a few days and come back." He came back 3 days later, got the suggestions, took the sketches to the studio, and had them finished according to the buyer's ideas. The result, all accepted. And after that, the buyer ordered scores of other drawings, all drawn according to his ideas. The salesman's own diagnosis is the chapter in one paragraph. I realize now why I had failed for years to sell him. I had urged him to buy what I thought he should have. Then I changed my approach completely. I urged him to give me his ideas. This made him feel that he was creating the designs. And he was. I didn't have to sell him, he bought. Now the version of this at the top of world affairs, because it shows how far a person will go if they actually want the outcome rather than the credit. Colonel Edward House was enormously influential in Woodrow Wilson's White House, more so at times than members of the cabinet, and he explained his method plainly. After getting to know the president, I learned the best way to convert him to an idea was to plant it in his mind casually, but so as to interest him in it, so as to get him thinking about it on his own account. And here's how he found out it worked. House once suggested something to Wilson and got a cool reception. But a few days later, at the dinner table, House heard Wilson give out that very suggestion as his own. Did House interrupt and say, "That's not your idea, that's mine"? No. Not House. He was too adroit. He didn't care for credit. He wanted results. So he let Wilson continue to feel the idea was his, and went further and gave Wilson the credit publicly. Now, is that dishonest? I want to poke at it, because you should. Here's how I've come to see it. If you can only accept an outcome when your name is on it, you're not trying to change the situation. You're trying to be seen changing it. Those are two different projects, and only one of them is influence. The cost is real, though, and I don't want to pretend otherwise. You will watch someone repeat your idea back to you with enthusiasm, having genuinely forgotten where it came from, and you will feel something. That feeling is the price. The question is only whether the outcome was worth it. And if the outcome doesn't matter enough to pay that, then it probably wasn't about the outcome. Carnegie's version of the same point is much older, from Lao Tse, 25 centuries ago. The reason the rivers and seas receive the homage of 100 mountain streams is that they keep below them. Thus, they are able to reign over all the mountain streams. So the sage, wishing to be above men, putteth himself below them. Wishing to be before them, he putteth himself behind them. The practical form of this principle is a question instead of a statement. Not, "Here's what we should do," but "What would you do here?" and then genuinely using what comes back. And there's a domestic case Carnegie gives that shows the real stakes. A father wanted his son to be enthusiastic about something the boy had refused for months. Instead of another round of persuasion, the family sat down and asked the boy what he wanted out of it, and built the plan around his answer. He came in willingly because it had become his. A car dealer's version, a customer who couldn't be sold on a price, was instead asked to appraise a used car himself and name what he thought it was worth. And the number he produced was one the dealer could work with, because the man was now defending his own valuation rather than attacking the dealer's. Same move every time. Stop pushing your conclusion and hand them the pen. Principle 7. Let the other person feel that the idea is his or hers. Part 3. Chapter 8. A formula that will work wonders for you. Remember that the other person may be totally wrong, but they don't think so. Don't condemn them. Any fool can do that. Try to understand them. Only wise, tolerant, exceptional people even try. There is a reason why the other man thinks and acts as he does. Ferret out that reason, and you have the key to his actions, perhaps to his personality. The instruction is to genuinely put yourself in their place. If you say to yourself, "How would I feel? How would I react if I were in his shoes?" You'll save yourself time and irritation, because by becoming interested in the cause, we are less likely to dislike the effect. And Carnegie is honest that this is real work, not a mood. He describes preferring to walk up and down in front of a person's office for 2 hours before going in, rather than walking in with only a clear idea of what he wanted to say, and no clear idea of what the other person might want. That pacing is the formula. If walking in unprepared means walking in wanting only your own thing, then the preparation is the empathy. The question to ask before you knock: why would they want to do this? Kenneth Good puts the scale of it in a way that's slightly uncomfortable. Stop a minute to contrast your keen interest in your own affairs with your mild concern about anything else. Realize then that everybody else in the world feels exactly the same way. Then, along with Lincoln and Roosevelt, you will have grasped the only solid foundation for interpersonal relationships, namely that success in dealing with people depends on a sympathetic grasp of the other person's viewpoint. Read that middle sentence again. Everybody else in the world feels exactly the same way. Your interest in your own affairs is total and constant. Your interest in anyone else's is mild and intermittent, and you are surrounded by billions of people for whom the ratio is identical and pointed the other way. That's not a sad fact. It's an operating manual. Carnegie's smaller illustrations all turn on the same pivot. A man whose neighborhood boys kept lighting fires in the park, and who, instead of threatening them with the police, sat with them and talked about how much fun a fire is, and how he'd love to see them enjoy themselves, and asked them to clear the leaves and put it out before they left. They cooperated willingly because he'd taken their side of it first. A man who wanted a broadcaster to reply to his letters and got nothing, until he wrote a letter that was entirely about the recipient's interests and problems, and got a prompt answer. And the general case: hundreds of salespeople pounding pavements, tired, discouraged, and underpaid. Why? Because they are always thinking only of what they want. They don't realize that neither you nor I want to buy anything. If we did, we'd go out and buy it. But both of us are eternally interested in solving our problems. And if a salesperson can show us how their service helps solve our problems, they won't need to sell us. We'll buy. Customers like to feel they are buying, not being sold. And here's Carnegie's own summary, which is the highest claim he makes about any single idea in the book. If, out of reading this book, you get just one thing, an increased tendency to think always in terms of the other person's point of view, and see things from their angle as well as your own. If you get that one thing out of this book, it may easily prove to be one of the stepping stones of your career. One thing out of 30 principles. This is the one he'd pick. I'd only add the caution he attaches, seeing it from their angle as well as your own, not instead of. This chapter is not an instruction to dissolve yourself into other people's preferences. It's an instruction to have complete information before you decide, which, when you think about it, is just competence. Principle 8. Try honestly to see things from the other person's point of view. Part 3. Chapter 9. What Everybody Wants. Wouldn't you like to have a magic phrase that would stop arguments, eliminate ill feeling, create goodwill, and make the other person listen attentively? Yes? All right, here it is. I don't blame you one iota for feeling as you do. If I were you, I would undoubtedly feel just as you do. An answer like that will soften the most cantankerous old cuss alive. And here's the important part. You can say it and be 100% sincere. Because if you were the other person, you would of course feel exactly as they do. Now, that sounds like a rhetorical convenience until Carnegie proves it, and the proof is the hardest sentence in the book. Take Al Capone. Suppose you had inherited the same body, the same temperament, the same mind Al Capone had. Suppose you'd had his environment and his experiences. You would then be precisely what he was, and where he was, because it is those things and only those things that made him what he was, and then the line that lands like a brick. The only reason you are not a rattlesnake is that your mother and father weren't rattlesnakes. So you deserve very little credit for being what you are, and the people who come to you irritated, bigoted, unreasoning deserve very little discredit for being what they are. Feel sorry for the poor devils, pity them, sympathize with them. Say to yourself, there, but for the grace of God go I. I find that genuinely hard to take, and I think you should too. Not because it's wrong, but because it costs something real. It takes away the pleasure of contempt, and contempt is a pleasure. It's warm, it's free, it requires no effort, and it makes you taller. Every time you decide someone is simply a bad or stupid person, you get a small clean hit of superiority, and you get to stop thinking about them. This chapter takes that away and replaces it with something much less satisfying, which is the recognition that the difference between you and the person you can't stand is mostly a difference of inputs you didn't choose either. 3/4 of the people you will ever meet are hungering and thirsting for sympathy. Give it to them, and they will love you. The applications are ordinary, which is the point. Carnegie describes handling a woman furious about a bill, a complaint that had already gone through several people and gotten worse each time. And the move that ended it was somebody finally saying, in effect, I don't blame you for feeling this way, and if I were in your position, I'd feel exactly the same. There's a musician who'd worked with a famously difficult performer, and whose entire method was accepting the temperament as a fact of the person rather than an insult to himself. And there's a mother who stopped fighting her child about a chore and instead said out loud what the child was feeling, and got cooperation within a minute. Every one of them is the same move. Say the other person's feeling back to them accurately before you say anything else. One caution, because there's a fake version. I understand how you feel, but is not this principle? That sentence is a shove with a cushion taped to the front of it, and everyone can feel the shove. The word but deletes everything before it. The real thing has no but. You say the sympathetic sentence, and then you stop, and you let it be true for a moment before anything else happens. The pause is doing the work, and if you can't say it sincerely, if you genuinely don't think you'd feel the same in their position, then you haven't done Chapter 8 yet. Go back and find the reason. It's there. Principle 9. Be sympathetic with the other person's ideas and desires. Part 3. Chapter 10. An appeal that everybody likes. Carnegie grew up on the edge of Jesse James country in Missouri and once visited the James farm where Jesse's son was then living. And his wife told stories of how Jesse robbed trains and held up banks, and then gave the money to neighboring farmers to pay off their mortgages. Jesse James probably regarded himself as an idealist at heart, just as Dutch Schultz and Gun Crowley and Al Capone did, 2 chapters and 1 part ago. The fact is, all people you meet have a high regard for themselves and like to be fine and unselfish in their own estimation. And then the observation that reorganizes how you ask anyone for anything, from J. Pierpont Morgan. A person usually has 2 reasons for doing a thing, one that sounds good and a real one. The person themselves will think of the real reason. You don't need to emphasize that, but all of us, being idealists at heart, like to think of motives that sound good. So in order to change people, appeal to the nobler motives. Here's the mechanism in a story about a landlord and a tenant. A tenant wanted to break his lease 4 months early. The rent was high. The landlord knew he had the legal right to hold him to it. And by his own account, the old version of himself would have gone in and quoted the contract. Instead, he went and said, essentially, "I've listened to you, and I still don't believe you intend to move. Years in this business have taught me something about human nature, and I sized you up in the first place as being a man of your word. I'm willing to take a chance, take a few days and think it over. If you still intend to move when the rent is due, I'll accept your decision as final. I'll privilege you to move and admit to myself that I've been wrong in my judgment. But I still believe you're a man of your word and will live up to your contract." The next month, the tenant came in and paid the rent in person. He and his wife had talked it over and decided to stay. They had concluded that the only honorable thing to do was to live up to the lease. Now, was that manipulation? Here's my honest read. The landlord gave the man a description of himself that he'd rather be true, and then left the room. He didn't take the choice away. He didn't threaten, didn't sue, didn't shame. He handed over an identity and let the man decide whether to wear it. And the tenant reached for the better one because most people, given a genuine free choice between 2 versions of themselves, do. That's the same move as Chapter 7. Give away the ownership, except pointed at character instead of ideas. The line where it would become manipulation is clear enough. If the landlord had known the man couldn't afford it, and used the flattery to trap him into paying anyway, that's a different act with the same words. The technique is identical, only the intent moved. Carnegie gives 2 more. Lord Northcliffe, when a newspaper printed a photograph of him, he didn't want published, didn't write about copyright or his own annoyance. He wrote asking them not to publish it again, because my mother doesn't like it. An appeal to the nobler motive, respect and reverence for mother. And John D. Rockefeller Jr., wanting newspaper photographers to stop taking pictures of his children, didn't cite privacy or his own preference. He said, "You know how it is, boys. You've got children yourselves, some of you, and you know it's not good for youngsters to get too much publicity." Same structure. Give the other person a fine reason to do the thing, and specifically a reason they'd be pleased to give if someone asked them why. The honest caveat Carnegie himself supplies: this doesn't work on everyone every time. Some people will take the money and run, and if experience tells you the person you're dealing with is a chiseler, no appeal to nobility will help. But the arithmetic still favors it. If most people are honest and want to live up to their obligations, And Carnegie's claim is that most are, most of the time, then treating the exception as the rule costs you far more than being occasionally wrong about a chiseler. You get more, on average, by assuming the better version of the person in front of you. Not because it's naive, because it's the higher yielding bet. Principle 10. Appeal to the nobler motives. Part 3. Chapter 11. The movies do it. TV does it. Why don't you do it? Merely stating a truth isn't enough. The truth has to be made vivid, interesting, dramatic. You have to use showmanship. The movies do it. Television does it. And you will have to do it if you want attention. The Philadelphia Evening Bulletin was being hurt by a whispering campaign. A malicious rumor was going around. Advertisers were being told the paper carried too much advertising and too little news. Immediate action was necessary. The gossip had to be squelched. But how? Here's what they did. They clipped from a single average day's edition all the reading matter of all kinds, classified it, and published it as a book. They called it One Day. It ran 307 pages, as long as a hardcover book, all of it printed in a single day, and sold for a few cents. That book conveyed the fact more vividly, more interestingly, and more impressively than pages of figures and mere talk could ever have done. Nobody argued with the rumor. They made the answer physical and put it in people's hands. Carnegie stacks several more, and they're all the same move. Turn the claim into an event. A cash register salesman calling on a grocer with an ancient machine. Instead of listing the benefits of a new register, he stood in front of the store owner, said the old one was going to be junked on the street anyway, and dropped it on the floor. The thud did more than any statistic. A man who wanted a raise didn't argue about it. He wrote out a full list of what he'd accomplished, on paper, and handed it across the desk. A rat poison manufacturer who gave dealers a window display with 2 live rats in it. Sales went 5 times normal, and a salesman demonstrating the difference between his cold cream and a rival's, not by describing it, but by having the buyer smell both. The buyer's face did the arguing. Why does it work? Go back to the 85% from part 1. You are not talking to a logic machine. A number goes into the part of a person that files things. A demonstration goes into the part that decides things. And this isn't only about selling. Carnegie's most human example is domestic. A wife who wanted her husband to stop leaving his things everywhere and who, instead of another lecture, simply gathered every item into a single visible pile in the middle of the room and left it there. Nothing was said. The pile said it. Same with a father wanting his child to understand why a rule existed and demonstrating the consequence safely instead of explaining it for the 5th time. The instruction underneath, which every writer, teacher, and parent eventually learns the hard way. Show, don't tell. It's the oldest advice in every creative field, and Carnegie is applying it to a conversation with your boss, your spouse, and your teenager. And it's the same reason this book itself works. Carnegie doesn't tell you that criticism is futile. He puts a killer in a death house and lets you watch him blame the police. He doesn't tell you that appreciation is valuable. He shows you a man being paid $1 million a year for it. Every idea in this book arrives as a scene. That's not decoration. That's the principle being used on you right now, and it has been working for 90 years. Principle 11. Dramatize your ideas. Part 3. Chapter 12. When nothing else works, try this. Charles Schwab had a mill manager whose people weren't producing their quota. How is it, Schwab asked him, that a manager as capable as you can't make this mill turn out what it should. And the manager said, I don't know. I've coaxed the men. I've pushed them. I've sworn and cussed. I've threatened them with damnation and being fired. But nothing works. They just won't produce. Every lever a manager has, all of them pulled, nothing. This conversation took place at the end of the day, just before the night shift came on. So Schwab asked the manager for a piece of chalk, turned to the nearest man and asked, How many heats did your shift make today? 6. And without another word, Schwab chalked a big figure 6 on the floor and walked away. When the night shift came in, they saw the 6 and asked what it meant. The big boss was in here today, the day people said. He asked how many heats we made, and we told him 6. He chalked it down on the floor. The next morning, Schwab walked through the mill again. The night shift had rubbed out the 6 and replaced it with a big 7. When the day shift came in, they saw the 7. So the night shift thought they were better than the day shift, did they? Well, they'd show them a thing or two. The crew pitched in with enthusiasm, and when they quit that night, they left behind an enormous, swaggering 10. Shortly, that mill, which had been lagging badly behind every other mill in the plant, was turning out more work than any of them. Nobody was paid more. Nobody was threatened. Nothing was said at all. A man drew a number on a floor with chalk. Schwab's own explanation. The way to get things done is to stimulate competition. I do not mean in a sordid, money-getting way, but in the desire to excel. The desire to excel. The challenge. The gauntlet thrown down. An infallible way of appealing to people of spirit. And Carnegie widens it. That's what makes foot races and hog-calling and pie-eating contests. The desire to excel. The desire for a feeling of importance, which puts us right back at the sheet of muslin with the blue ribbons pinned to it from part 1. He has a bigger one too, from Al Smith when he was governor of New York. Smith needed a warden for Sing Sing, the notorious prison west of Devil's Island. Scandals had been sweeping through it, ugly ones. He needed a strong man, an Iron Man. But who? He sent for Lewis Laws, the same warden we met in the very first chapter. And when Laws stood before him, Smith said cheerily, How about going up to take charge of Sing Sing? They need a man up there with experience. Laws was taken aback. He knew the dangers. It was a political appointment subject to the whims of politics. Wardens came and went. One had lasted only 3 weeks. He had a career to consider. Was it worth the risk? And then Smith, seeing him hesitate, leaned back in his chair and smiled. Young fellow, I don't blame you for being scared. It's a tough spot. It'll take a big person to go up there and stay. A challenge. And Laws took it, and stayed, and became the most famous warden of his time, and his books on prison life sold in the millions. Now, the honest limit on this principle, since it's the one most easily abused. A challenge works on people who already want to be excellent. It's fuel, not fire. It presumes the fire. Thrown at someone who is exhausted, frightened, or already failing in front of an audience, I don't think you can do it, isn't a challenge. It's contempt with plausible deniability. And you'll know which one you did by whether they got bigger or smaller. Note also what Schwab did not do. He didn't tell anyone they were underperforming. He didn't mention the quota. He gave them a number and let them decide it was a contest. The chalk didn't demand anything. It just made the score visible. And people who want to excel will do the rest themselves. Principle 12, throw down a challenge. And that's part 3. 12 principles for winning people to your way of thinking. And it's worth noticing the arc when you lay them end to end. It starts by taking away your favorite weapon, the argument. Then your favorite sentence, you're wrong. Then it makes you go first with your own faults. Then it makes you give away credit for your own idea. And by the end, you're drawing chalk numbers on a floor, instead of making speeches. Every single one is a subtraction. They are all versions of the same move, getting yourself out of the way. Now the last part, which is the hardest, because it's the one where you're the person with the power. Part 4. Chapter 1. If you must find fault, this is the way to begin. Before this part starts, I want to name why it's the hardest. Everything up to now has been about people you have no power over. Customers, strangers, the man at the post office. It is relatively easy to be diplomatic with people who can simply walk away from you. This part is about the situation where you can just make them do it, where you're the parent, the manager, the senior person, the one holding the schedule or the paycheck or the car keys. And that's what makes it hard. In that situation, every one of these principles costs you something you're entitled to keep. You have the right to give the order. Carnegie's whole argument is that the right is nearly worthless compared with what you can get by not using it. The subtitle of this part is The Promise: How to Change People Without Giving Offense or Arousing Resentment. Carnegie opens with Calvin Coolidge, of all people. A friend of his was a weekend guest at the White House and, drifting into the president's office, overheard Coolidge say to one of his secretaries, "That's a pretty dress you are wearing this morning, and you are a very attractive young woman." That was probably the most effusive praise Silent Cal ever bestowed upon a secretary in his life. It was so unusual, so unexpected, that she blushed. Whereupon Coolidge said, "Now don't get stuck up. I just said that to make you feel good. From now on, I wish you would be a little bit more careful with your punctuation." Carnegie's verdict is perfect. His method was perhaps a bit obvious, but the psychology was superb. It is always easier to listen to unpleasant things after we have heard some praise of our good points. And then the analogy that makes it stick. A barber lathers a man before he shaves him. That's exactly it. The lather isn't the shave, the lather isn't flattery, and it isn't the point of the visit. It's what makes the blade survivable. Skip the lather and you can still shave the man. It'll just hurt, and he'll remember, and he may not come back. The bigger example is McKinley running for president in 1896. A prominent Republican had written a campaign speech which he believed was just a little bit better than Cicero, Patrick Henry, and Daniel Webster all combined. He read his immortal speech aloud to McKinley. The speech had its fine points, but it simply would not do. It would raise a storm of criticism. And McKinley had to say so, without wounding the man's feelings, without killing his splendid enthusiasm. And yet he had to say no. Note how adroitly he did it. "My friend, that is a splendid speech, a magnificent speech," said McKinley. "No one could have prepared a better one. On many occasions it would be precisely the right thing to say, but is it quite suitable to this particular occasion? Sound and sober as it is from your standpoint, I must consider its effect from the party's standpoint. Now you go home and write a speech along the lines I indicate, and send me a copy of it." He did just that. McKinley blue-penciled and helped him rewrite his second speech. And he became one of the most effective speakers of the campaign. Notice something in McKinley's answer that's easy to miss. The praise was true. The speech was good. It was good and wrong for this occasion. Two separate facts, and he affirmed the first one honestly before raising the second. That's the difference between the lather and a con. If you invent praise to soften a blow, you've built the sandwich everyone can smell. If you find the part that's genuinely good, and there almost always is one, and say it because it's true, then the correction arrives from someone who was clearly paying attention. And that changes what the correction means. Criticism from someone who noticed what you did well is information. Criticism from someone who noticed nothing is just weather. Principle 1. Begin with praise and honest appreciation. Part 4, Chapter 2, How to Criticize and Not Be Hated for It. Charles Schwab is walking through one of his steel mills at noon, and he comes across some of his employees smoking. Directly above their heads is a sign that says, "No smoking." Did Schwab point at the sign and say, "Can't you read?" Oh no, not Schwab. He walked over to the men, handed each one a cigar, and said, "I'll appreciate it, boys, if you will smoke these on the outside." They knew that they had broken a rule. And they admired him because he said nothing about it, gave them a little present, and made them feel important. Read that again and notice what actually happened. Because it's easy to file it under, "He was nice." He wasn't only nice, he got total compliance and zero resentment in one sentence without ever naming the offense. If he'd pointed at the sign, he'd have gotten compliance and a story those men told about him for the next 20 years. John Wanamaker used the same technique. He toured his great Philadelphia store every day. Once he saw a customer waiting at a counter with nobody paying her the slightest attention. The salespeople were at the far end of the counter, laughing among themselves. Wanamaker said not a word. Quietly slipping behind the counter, he waited on the woman himself, and then handed the purchase to the salespeople to be wrapped as he went on his way. No reprimand, and no chance whatsoever that those salespeople forgot it. Now the technical bit, which is much smaller than it sounds and changes everything. Many people begin their criticism with sincere praise, followed by the word "but," and ending with a critical statement. For example, in trying to change a child's careless attitude towards studies, we might say, "We're really proud of you, Johnny, for raising your grades this term. But if you had worked harder on your algebra, the results would have been better." Johnny might feel encouraged until he hears the word "but." He may then question the sincerity of the original praise. The praise seemed only to be a contrived lead-in to a critical inference of failure. Credibility would be strained, and we probably wouldn't achieve our aim of changing his attitude. This could be easily overcome by changing the word "but" to and "We're really proud of you, Johnny, for raising your grades this term, and by continuing the same conscientious efforts next term, your algebra grade can be up with all the others." Now Johnny accepts the praise because there was no follow-up of an inference of failure. We have called his attention to the behavior we wish to change indirectly, and the chances are he will try to live up to our expectations. One word, but deletes the sentence in front of it and keeps it. Everybody knows the compliment sandwich, and almost nobody knows that a single conjunction is the difference between a trick people can smell and something that actually works. The sandwich fails not because praising before correcting is manipulative. It fails because but announces that the praise was scaffolding. Try it on yourself. "You did great work on this, but the deadline slipped." Versus, "You did great work on this. And if we can hold the deadline next time, it'll land properly. The first one, you heard the second half only. The second one, you heard both." Carnegie's other examples are all the same shape, correction delivered without an accusation attached. A man whose construction crew wasn't wearing hard hats. The old approach was to cite the regulation and order compliance. The men complied resentfully and took them off the moment he left. The new approach was to ask whether the helmets were uncomfortable or didn't fit properly, and to mention, pleasantly, that the helmet was designed to prevent injury. Compliance went up and resentment went down, because he'd made it about their heads rather than his authority. And a family one. An aunt whose nephews had trampled her lawn, who said nothing to the boys directly, but praised the one who was most cooperative in front of the others, and watched the rest fall in line to be included in that description, indirectly. That's the whole word. Everyone in the room knows exactly what was meant. Nobody had to be told they were wrong. Principle 2. Call attention to people's mistakes indirectly. Part 4, Chapter 3. Talk about your own mistakes first. Carnegie's niece, Josephine, came to New York to be his secretary. She was 19, 3 years out of high school, business experience just a shade above zero. She became, he says, one of the most proficient secretaries west of Suez. But in the beginning, in his words, she was susceptible to improvement. And one day he started to criticize her and stopped himself mid-thought. Just a minute, Dale Carnegie. Just a minute. You are twice as old as Josephine. You have had 10,000 times as much business experience. How can you possibly expect her to have your viewpoint, your judgment, your initiative, mediocre though they may be? And just a minute, Dale. What were you doing at 19? Remember the asinine mistakes and blunders you made? Remember the time you did this and that? After thinking it over honestly and impartially, he concluded that Josephine's batting average at 19 was better than his own had been, and that, he admits, was not a compliment to Josephine. So after that, whenever he wanted to call her attention to a mistake, he'd begin. You have made a mistake, Josephine, but the Lord knows it's no worse than many I have made. You were not born with judgment. That comes only with experience, and you are better than I was at your age. I have been guilty of so many stupid, silly things myself, I have very little inclination to criticize you or anyone. But don't you think it would have been wiser if you had done so and so? It isn't nearly so difficult to listen to a recital of your faults if the person criticizing begins by humbly admitting that they, too, are far from impeccable. The historical version of this is a good one, because the stakes were an empire. 1909. Prince Bernhard von Bülow was Chancellor of Germany, and Kaiser Wilhelm II had just said something disastrous in public, arrogant, absurd statements that set Europe buzzing and caused explosions of anger across the continent. Britain was furious, and in his panic, the Kaiser wanted von Bülow to take the blame, to announce that he had been responsible for advising the emperor to say such incredible things. Von Bülow protested that it was inconceivable anyone in Germany or England would believe him capable of advising the Kaiser to say such things. And the moment those words were out of his mouth, he realized he'd made a grave mistake. The Kaiser blew up. You consider me a donkey, he cried, who could make blunders you yourself could never have committed. Von Bülow knew he should have praised before he condemned. But it was too late for that, so he did the next best thing. He praised after he had criticized, and it worked a miracle. He said respectfully that he hadn't meant that at all, that His Majesty excelled him in many respects, not only in naval and military knowledge, but above all in natural science. He said he had often listened in admiration as the Kaiser explained the barometer, or wireless telegraphy, or Röntgen rays, while he himself was shamefully ignorant of all the natural sciences, without notion of chemistry or physics, and quite incapable of explaining the simplest natural phenomenon. But, he added, in compensation I possess some historical knowledge and perhaps certain qualities useful in politics, especially diplomacy. The Kaiser beamed. Von Bülow had praised him. Von Bülow had exalted him and humbled himself, and the Kaiser could forgive anything after that. Haven't I always told you, he exclaimed enthusiastically, that we complement one another famously? We should stick together, and we will. He shook hands, not once, but several times, and later that day he became so enthusiastic, he cried, with his fists doubled up, If anyone says anything to me against Prince von Bülow, I shall punch him in the nose. Von Bülow saved himself in time, but note Carnegie's own comment on it. Although he was a consummate diplomat, he still made an error. He should have begun by talking about his own shortcomings and Wilhelm's superiority, not by intimating that the Kaiser was a half-wit in need of a guardian. The order matters. Humility first is a strategy. Humility second is a rescue. The lesson Carnegie draws is stated plainly, and it's worth holding on to because it's more forgiving than most advice about integrity. Admitting one's own mistakes, even when one hasn't corrected them, can help convince somebody to change their behavior, even when you haven't corrected them. You don't have to have solved the problem to say honestly that you have it. In fact, the person who says, "I'm still bad at this, and here's what it cost me," is far more persuasive than the one who has it perfectly under control, because the second one has nothing in common with the person they're advising. Principle 3. Talk about your own mistakes before criticizing the other person. Part 4, Chapter 4. No one likes to take orders. Carnegie once dined with Ida Tarbell, the Dean of American Biographers, and she told him that while she was writing her biography of Owen D. Young, she interviewed a man who had sat for 3 years in the same office with him. That man declared that in all that time, he had never once heard Owen D. Young give a direct order to anyone. 3 years. Not one order. He always gave suggestions, not orders. He never said, "Do this or do that," or "Don't do this or don't do that." He'd say, "You might consider this," or "Do you think that would work?" Frequently he'd say, after dictating a letter, "What do you think of this?" Looking over a letter from one of his assistants, he'd say, "Maybe if we were to phrase it this way, it would be better." He always gave people the opportunity to do things themselves. He never told his assistants to do things. He let them do them and let them learn from their mistakes. A technique like that makes it easy for a person to correct their errors. It saves a person's pride and gives them a feeling of importance. It encourages cooperation instead of rebellion. And then Carnegie gives the operational reason, which is worth far more than the politeness. Asking questions not only makes an order more palatable, it often stimulates the creativity of the person you ask. People are more likely to accept an order if they have had a part in the decision that caused the order to be issued. That is the whole of modern participative management, written in 1936 in one sentence. The example that shows the size of it: a manufacturing plant had received an order with a deadline it almost certainly couldn't hit. The schedule was full, and the date was brutal. The old move is to announce the deadline and demand overtime. Instead, the manager called the people together, explained the situation honestly, and then started asking questions. Is there any way we could handle this? Has anyone got an idea about how to process it that would make it possible to take the order? And the employees came up with the ideas themselves, moving things around, adjusting the run, taking a different approach. They came at it with a "we can do it" attitude. The order was accepted, produced, and delivered on time. Nobody was ordered. And the plan was better than the one the manager would have written alone, because the people who ran the machines knew things about the machines that he didn't. That's the hidden dividend in this principle. The order is a request for compliance. The question is a request for information. And the people closest to the work almost always have information you don't. There's another, quieter one Carnegie includes: an executive who had to tell a subordinate his role was being changed, and who framed the entire conversation as a set of questions about what the man wanted and what he was best at, so that the outcome arrived as a shared conclusion rather than a demotion delivered from above. Same principle, higher stakes. The facts didn't change. Who did the concluding did. The practical form is embarrassingly simple, and I use it constantly now. Take the sentence you are about to say as an instruction and put a question mark on the end of the reasoning instead of the conclusion. Not, "Send this out today," but "What would it take to get this out today?" The second one gets you the same thing, plus an honest answer about whether it's actually possible, which the first one will never tell you until it's too late. Principle 4. Ask questions instead of giving direct orders. Part 4. Chapter 5. Let the other person save face. Years ago, the General Electric Company was faced with a delicate task. They had to remove Charles Steinmetz from the head of a department. Steinmetz was a genius of the first magnitude when it came to electricity, and a failure as the head of the calculating department. But the company didn't dare offend the man. He was indispensable, and he was highly sensitive. So they gave him a new title. They made him consulting engineer of the General Electric Company, a new title for work he was already doing, and let somebody else head up the department. Steinmetz was happy. So were the officers of GE. They had gently maneuvered their most temperamental star, and they had done it without a storm, by letting him save face. Now here's the part of this chapter that should sting, because it's the most commonly violated principle in the book, letting one save face. How important, how vitally important that is, and how few of us ever stop to think of it. We ride roughshod over the feelings of others, getting our own way, finding fault, issuing threats, criticizing a child or an employee in front of others, without even considering the hurt to the other person's pride. Whereas a few minutes' thought, a considerate word or two, a genuine understanding of the other person's attitude would go so far toward alleviating the sting. In front of others. That's the phrase to sit with. Almost everyone reading this has been corrected publicly at some point, and can still name the room. The example that makes it real is a firing. The hardest possible test. An accounting firm has to let seasonal staff go after tax season. It's nobody's pleasure to wield the axe, and the practice had been to get it over as quickly as possible. Usually something like, "Sit down, Mr. Smith. The season's over, and we don't seem to have any more assignments for you. Of course, you understood you were only employed for the busy season." The effect on those people was a sense of disappointment and of being let down. Most of them were in accounting for life, and they retained no particular affection for the firm that dropped them so casually. So one of the partners decided to do it differently. He interviewed each person only after thinking carefully over their winter's work, and said something like, "Mr. Smith, you've done a fine job. That time we sent you to Newark, you had a tough assignment. You were on the spot, but you came through with flying colors, and we want you to know the firm is proud of you. You've got the stuff. You're going a long way, wherever you're working. This firm believes in you and is rooting for you, and we don't want you to forget it." The effect, the people went away feeling a lot better about being let go. They didn't feel let down. They knew that if the firm had had work, it would have kept them. And when they were needed again, they came back with a personal affection, same decision, same outcome for the person's employment. Entirely different thing to carry home. And then Carnegie's closing move, which is the strongest moral claim in this entire book, and notably he borrows it because his own register is practical and this one has iron in it. Even if we are right and the other person is definitely wrong, we only destroy ego by causing someone to lose face. The French aviation pioneer and author Antoine de Saint-Exupéry wrote, "I have no right to say or do anything that diminishes a man in his own eyes. What matters is not what I think of him, but what he thinks of himself. Hurting a man in his dignity is a crime. I want to leave that one alone for a second. I have no right to say or do anything that diminishes a man in his own eyes. Not it's unwise, not it's counterproductive. I have no right." That's the sentence that separates the operator from the leader. An operator will happily let you keep your dignity when it's cheap, and take it the moment it costs him something. The line here is drawn before the cost is known. The practical test, and it's uncomfortable. Think of the last time you corrected someone with other people present. Could it have waited 4 hours and happened privately? Almost always the answer is yes, and if it could have, then the audience wasn't a necessity of the situation. The audience was part of the message. Principle 5. Let the other person save face. Part 4, Chapter 6, How to Spur People On to Success. Carnegie had an old friend named Pete Barlow who had a dog and pony act and spent his life traveling with circuses and vaudeville shows. And Carnegie loved to watch Pete train new dogs. Here's what he noticed. The moment a dog showed the slightest improvement, Pete patted him and praised him and gave him meat and made a great to-do about it. Nothing new there. Animal trainers have used that technique for centuries. So Carnegie asks the obvious question, one of those questions that is slightly humiliating once someone says it out loud. Why don't we use the same common sense when trying to change people that we use when trying to change dogs? Why don't we use meat instead of a whip? Why don't we use praise instead of condemnation? Let us praise even the slightest improvement. That inspires the other person to keep on improving. Now watch what this looks like at the scale of an entire life. Carnegie gives 3, and they're the most affecting pages in the book. A boy in Naples wants to be a singer. His first teacher discourages him. You can't sing, you haven't any voice at all. It sounds like the wind in the shutters. But his mother, a poor peasant woman, puts her arms around him and praises him and tells him she knows he can sing, that she can see the improvement already. She goes barefoot in order to save money for his music lessons. That peasant mother's praise and encouragement changed that boy's life. His name was Enrico Caruso, and he became the greatest and most famous opera singer of his age. A boy in London wants to be a writer. Everything is against him. He's had no more than 4 years of schooling. His father has been thrown in jail because he couldn't pay his debts, and this boy has known the pangs of hunger. Eventually he gets a job pasting labels on bottles in a rat-infested warehouse and sleeps at night in a dismal attic room with 2 other boys from the slums of London. He has so little confidence in his ability to write that he sneaks out and mails his first manuscript in the dead of night so nobody will laugh at him. Story after story is refused. Finally, the great day comes when one is accepted. He isn't paid a shilling for it, but the editor praises him. An editor recognized him. He's so thrilled that he wanders aimlessly around the streets with tears rolling down his cheeks. The praise and recognition he got from having one story in print changed his entire career. That boy was Charles Dickens, and a third boy works in a dry goods store. Up at 5 in the morning, sweeping, slaving 14 hours a day. He stands it for 2 years and can't bear it any longer. So he walks 15 miles to talk with his mother, who is working as a housekeeper. He's frantic. He pleads, he weeps, he swears he'll kill himself if he has to stay in that store. Then he writes a long, pathetic letter to his old schoolmaster, saying he's heartbroken and doesn't want to live any longer. The old schoolmaster gives him a little praise, assures him he really is very intelligent and fitted for finer things, and offers him a job as a teacher. That praise changed the future of that boy and made a lasting impression on the history of English literature. Because that boy went on to write 77 books and make over $1 million with his pen. His name was H.G. Wells, 3 lives. And notice what they have in common. All 3 were, at the moment of the intervention, objectively not good at the thing. The first teacher wasn't lying about Caruso's voice. Dickens's stories genuinely were being rejected. Wells genuinely was a failing shop boy. And the variable that decided the outcome wasn't talent. The talent was there either way. It was whether the nearest available adult chose to describe the fractional improvement or the current deficit. Carnegie's summary of the psychology: abilities wither under criticism, they blossom under encouragement. And then William James on how much of us goes unused. Compared to what we ought to be, we are only half awake. We are making use of only a small part of our physical and mental resources. Stating the thing broadly, the human individual thus lives far within his limits. He possesses powers of various sorts, which he habitually fails to use. And Carnegie turns it on the reader. Yes, you who are reading these lines possess powers of various sorts which you habitually fail to use. And one of these powers you are probably not using to the fullest extent is your magic ability to praise people and inspire them with a realization of their latent possibilities. Here's where I'll indict myself, because I've done the opposite of Pete Barlow with real people. Someone shows me a draft that's 20% better than the last one, and I go straight to the 80% that isn't there yet. And I told myself a very flattering story about that, which is that I have high standards. But look at the mechanism honestly. The person in front of me has just produced evidence of movement. Movement is the rarest thing in the world and the only thing that predicts the outcome. And I would reliably not mention it. And then wonder later why they'd stopped showing me things early and started showing me things only when they were finished and defended. You don't get more improvement by withholding recognition of improvement. That is not how any organism that has ever been studied works. Not dogs, not children, not steelworkers, not you. Principle 6. Praise the slightest improvement and praise every improvement. Be hearty in your approbation and lavish in your praise. Part 4. Chapter 7. Give a dog a good name. The title comes from an old proverb: give a dog a bad name and you may as well hang him. And Carnegie is running it in reverse. If you want to improve a person in a certain aspect, act as though that particular trait were already one of their outstanding characteristics. Shakespeare's version: assume a virtue if you have it not. And Carnegie's application: assume and state openly that other people have the virtue you want them to develop. Give them a fine reputation to live up to, and they will make prodigious efforts rather than see you disillusioned. The example is a housekeeper, and it's a small masterpiece of nerve. A woman engages a new maid, Nellie, and tells her to start the following Monday. In the meantime, she telephones the woman's former employer and learns some unfavorable things. When the maid arrives, here's what she says: "Nellie, I called the woman you worked for the other day. She told me you were honest and reliable, a good cook and good with the children. But she also said you were a slovenly housekeeper and never kept the house clean. Now I think she was lying. You dress neatly. Anybody can see that. I'll wager you keep the house as neat as your person. You and I are going to get along fine." And they did. Nellie had a reputation to live up to, and she lived up to it. She scrubbed and dusted an extra hour rather than disappoint the expectation that had been handed to her. Another, a restaurant manager with a chronically sloppy waiter. Instead of a reprimand, he praised the man in front of the other staff as one of the best in the place and mentioned specifically how clean and neat the kitchen had been that day. The waiter had a reputation to live up to, and from then on he maintained it without being asked again. And Carnegie's larger one, Henry Clay Risner, in France during the war, dealing with soldiers who'd been behaving badly. He didn't accuse them. He told them the finest people in France believed they were among the finest people in America, and gave them something worth being. Now, the honest tension in this principle, because you should hear it. There's a version of this that is simply lying about someone to their face to extract labor from them. "You're so good at this," said to a person who is not good at it, in order to get free work. The line, I think, is whether you are describing something they could be true of and would want to be true of, or manufacturing a fiction for your own convenience. Look closely at what the employer actually said to Nellie. "You dress neatly. Anybody can see that." That observation was real. She took a true thing she could see and extended it into an invitation. That's the move. Real evidence, generously extended. If she'd said, "Everyone tells me you're the finest housekeeper in the city," pure invention, Nellie would have known immediately, and the whole thing collapses. And notice how this connects all the way back to the very first chapter of the book. Gun Crowley thought he had a kind heart. Everyone is walking around defending a self-image. Criticism attacks the self-image and makes people defend it. This principle hands them a better one and lets them defend that instead. Same machinery, opposite direction. That's why they're the first and the 27th chapters of the same book. The version of this that matters most has nothing to do with employees. It's what you are currently telling a child, or a partner, or a colleague about who they are, casually, repeatedly, in throwaway sentences. He's the difficult one. She's not really a details person. You always do this. Those are reputations too. They're just the other kind. And people live up to those as reliably as Nellie lived up to hers. Principle 7. Give the other person a fine reputation to live up to. Part 4. Chapter 8. Make the fault seem easy to correct. A bachelor friend of Carnegie's, about 40 years old, becomes engaged, and his fiancée persuades him to take some belated dancing lessons. "The Lord knows I needed dancing lessons," he admits, "for I danced just as I did when I first started 20 years ago." The first teacher probably told him the truth. She said he was all wrong, that he'd have to forget everything and begin all over again. And that took the heart out of him. He had no incentive to go on. So he quit her. The next teacher may have been lying, but he liked it. She said nonchalantly that his dancing was a bit old-fashioned perhaps, but the fundamentals were all right, and she assured him he wouldn't have any trouble learning a few new steps. The first teacher discouraged him by emphasizing his mistakes. The new one did the opposite. She kept praising what he did right and minimizing his errors. "You have a natural sense of rhythm," she told him. "You really are a natural-born dancer." Now his common sense told him he had always been and always would be a fourth-rate dancer. Yet deep down, he liked to think that maybe she meant it. Of course he was paying her to say it. But why bring that up? And here's his conclusion. At any rate, I know I'm a better dancer than I would have been if she hadn't told me I had a natural sense of rhythm. That encouraged me. That gave me hope. That made me want to improve. Notice that Carnegie doesn't hide the awkward part. The first teacher was more accurate. He says so plainly. She told the truth, and it produced a man who quit. That's the uncomfortable finding in this chapter. Accuracy and usefulness are not the same thing, and a correct assessment delivered in a way that ends the attempt has achieved nothing except being correct. So, tell your child, your spouse, or your employee that they are stupid at a certain thing, that they have no gift for it, that they're doing it all wrong, and you have destroyed almost every incentive to try to improve. But use the opposite technique. Be liberal with encouragement. Make the thing seem easy to do. Let the other person know you have faith in their ability to do it, that they have an undeveloped flair for it, and they will practice until the dawn comes in at the window in order to excel. The key word in the whole chapter is easy. Not possible. Not achievable with effort. Easy. And here's why that specific word, because it took me a long time to understand it. Effort is not rationed by difficulty, it's rationed by expected futility. People don't quit hard things. People run marathons and learn instruments and raise children, all extremely hard. What people quit is things they believe they cannot get better at. The moment the internal verdict is, I'm just not built for this, the effort stops, and no amount of encouragement about how important it is will restart it. So when you tell someone a fault is easy to correct, you are not lying about the difficulty. You're making a claim about their trajectory, that they're the kind of person who gets better at this. And the trajectory is the thing that determines whether they keep going. Carnegie has a work version too, a man given a complex new responsibility who was told, in effect, this is well within what you already do. You've handled harder. And a manager who, rather than listing everything a struggling employee was getting wrong, isolated one thing, made it sound trivially fixable, and got it fixed, and then the next one. One at a time, each one framed as small. Because a person told they have 12 problems has an identity problem. A person told they have one small fixable thing has a task. Principle 8. Use encouragement. Make the fault seem easy to correct. Part 4. Chapter 9. Making people glad to do what you want. 1915. America is aghast. For more than a year, the nations of Europe have been slaughtering one another on a scale never before dreamed of in all the bloody annals of mankind. Could peace be brought about? No one knew, but Woodrow Wilson was determined to try. He would send a personal representative, a peace emissary, to counsel with the warlords of Europe. William Jennings Bryan, Secretary of State, Bryan the peace advocate, longed to go. He saw a chance to perform a great service and make his name immortal. But Wilson appointed another man, his intimate friend and advisor, Colonel Edward House. And it was House's thorny task to break the unwelcome news to Bryan without giving offense. House's own account. Bryan was distinctly disappointed when he heard I was to go to Europe as the peace emissary. He said he had planned to do it himself. And House replied that the president thought it would be unwise for anyone to do this officially, and that Bryan's going would attract a great deal of attention, and people would wonder why he was there. You see the intimation. House hinted that Bryan was too important for the job, and Bryan was satisfied. Carnegie's read. House, adroit and experienced in the ways of the world, was following one of the important rules of human relations. Always make the other person happy about doing the thing you suggest. The identical news, the identical outcome, delivered as a statement about Bryan's stature rather than about Wilson's preference. Woodrow Wilson used the same move when he invited William Gibbs McAdoo to become a member of his cabinet. It was the highest honor he could confer on anybody. And yet he extended the invitation in a way that made McAdoo feel doubly important. McAdoo's own words, he said he was making up his cabinet and would be very happy if I would accept a place in it. He had a delightful way of putting things. He seemed to convey the impression that by accepting this great honor, I would be doing him a favor, and a smaller one because this principle lives mostly in ordinary rooms. A dentist's office, where a woman notices the cup holder on the unit is a rusty metal one, not exactly reassuring in a place that ought to be spotless. The assistant, instead of defending it or getting embarrassed, responds in a way that gives her the higher role in the exchange. She's right, it's not up to standard, and thank you for saying so. We care about this. And the woman comes away feeling like a person whose standards were respected rather than a complainer. Same information. different seat assigned to the other person. The core, people will usually do what you suggest if you can show them how it benefits them, genuinely, and if you frame the request in terms of what they value rather than what you need. And Carnegie attaches a caution to it that is essentially the ethical spine of the entire book. Be sincere. Do not promise anything you cannot deliver. Forget the benefits to yourself and concentrate on the benefits to the other person. Know what it is the other person wants. Match those benefits to their wants. When you make your request, put it in a form that will convey the idea that they will personally benefit. And that is all 30. 3 for handling people, 6 for making people like you, 12 for winning people to your way of thinking, 9 for leadership. Now, a word about how it feels to hold all 30 at once, because this is the moment many people close the book feeling slightly worse than when they opened it. 30 is too many. Nobody executes 30 principles in a conversation. If you walk into dinner tonight running a 30-item checklist against your own family, you will be the strangest person at that table. Everyone will feel it, and the effect will be the precise opposite of everything Carnegie was after. So here's the compression, and I think it's fair to the book. Almost every one of the 30 is a specific answer to a single question. What would it cost me to let this person be a whole human being with their own reasons, right now, instead of an obstacle in my way? That's it. Don't criticize is that. Give appreciation is that. See their point of view is that. Let them save face is that. Let them own the idea is that. Everyone is the same move, applied at a different moment. Which brings us to the last chapter, and it's the only one that isn't in the book. Because I promised you at the start that we'd do the honest part. Where this book fails, when it turns into something ugly and the one thing it cannot give you. The honest chapter, when this book becomes a weapon. So I remember watching a guy at a work event do all of this to a room, flawlessly. He remembered every name. First meeting, an hour later, perfect. He asked people about themselves and did not once redirect to himself. He found the specific true compliment. He never argued with anyone. When someone said something wrong, he said, I hadn't thought of it like that. He made a senior person feel like the smartest man alive by asking his opinion about something he'd clearly already decided. Textbook, 30 for 30. He'd have gotten an A from Carnegie himself. And I remember standing at the edge of it thinking, this is the most frightening person in this building. Because there was nothing behind any of it. You could tell, not from any single move, all the moves were correct. You could tell from the allocation. The warmth went where the leverage was. Watch anybody long enough at a party and you learn what they're for. Watch him for an hour and you learn that people were a medium he moved through. That's what this chapter is about. Because everything you've just heard is real. And it works. And there's a version of it that is genuinely poisonous. And Carnegie, to his credit, saw it coming and could not fully solve it. Let's put the strongest version of the case against this book, because it deserves a real hearing. 1. It teaches the appearance of virtues rather than the virtues. Every principle here is about behavior. Smile, listen, remember names, don't argue, praise. And behaviors can be produced by anyone with any motive. There's no principle in this book that a con artist would find inconvenient. In fact, a con artist would find this the single most useful book ever written, and many have. 2. It can slide into inauthenticity. Carnegie tells you to be sincere on nearly every page. But he also tells you to sit up late reading about someone's hobbies before they visit, to talk about boats when you don't care about boats, to praise a person's hair to win them over in a post office queue. There's a real question about where cultivating a genuine interest ends and performing one begins. And the book's answer is essentially, be sincere, which is not a procedure. 3, and this is the sharpest, it can teach the powerless to accommodate. If you're always avoiding the argument, always giving the other person the credit, always finding what's agreeable in the boss's bad idea, you can end up extremely well-liked and completely erased. Carnegie has a lot of technique for winning people and comparatively little for holding a line. That third one is the one I'd actually worry about for most people who take this book seriously. Because the people who most eagerly adopt, don't criticize, don't argue, make them feel important, tend to be, in my experience, the people who were already doing too much of that. The people who genuinely need it don't think they do. Now here's the part that made me want to do these 2 episodes back to back, because if you were here for the last one, you've already heard the most famous critique of this book, and you may not have realized it was aimed here. Stephen Covey opens The 7 Habits by describing a piece of research he did. He read the entire success literature of the United States going back 200 years, and he found a break. For the first 150 years, Benjamin Franklin's autobiography being the model, the literature was about character, integrity, humility, courage, patience, justice, simplicity. The idea being that there are principles that govern human effectiveness, the way gravity governs falling objects, and success comes from slowly, privately becoming a person who lives by them. Then, right after the First World War, it changes. Suddenly, success is about personality, image, attitudes, behaviors, skills, techniques, how to influence, how to be liked, how to project. Covey calls that second thing the personality ethic, and he says it's a shallower thing wearing the clothes of the deeper one. How to Win Friends and Influence People was published in 1936. It is, chronologically and substantively, the flagship of everything Covey means by the personality ethic. He doesn't attack it by name much, but the shoe fits, and everyone knows it. And Covey's core objection is the one I find genuinely hard to answer. In the long run, what you are speaks so loudly that people cannot hear what you say. You cannot fake a smile for 6 months. Your family knows. Your team knows. If the character underneath is off, the techniques don't hide it. They broadcast it, because the gap between the polish and the person is itself information, and people read it accurately even when they can't name what they're reading. Remember the guy at the party? Nobody could have pointed to a single wrong move. Everybody knew. But I don't want to just hand the argument to the last book we did, because I've come to think that's too easy. And there are 2 places where Carnegie holds up better than his critics allow. First, Carnegie is not actually silent on character. He's just quieter about it, and it's easy to miss under all the technique. Go back and count the moments in this book that are only about character and have no technique in them at all. If our souls are no bigger than sour crab apples, we shall meet with the failure we so richly deserve. Feel sorry for the poor devils, there, but for the grace of God go I. The only reason you are not a rattlesnake is that your parents weren't rattlesnakes. I have no right to say or do anything that diminishes a man in his own eyes. None of those are techniques. Those are moral claims, and they're doing the same job Covey's private victory does. They just arrive as asides rather than as a system. Second, and this is the one I'd defend hardest, behavior is a real route to character, not only a mask over it. Covey's model runs inside out. Fix the person, and the behavior follows. And that's true, but it's not the only true thing. Carnegie's own smiling chapter quotes William James on exactly this. Action and feeling go together, and by regulating the action, which is under the direct control of the will, we indirectly regulate the feeling, which is not. Here's what I mean concretely. If you decide today that you will not criticize anyone for 30 days, something will happen to you that is not a performance. You'll start noticing the urge before it fires. You'll start asking why the person did the thing. You will, in the process of behaving like someone who is curious rather than contemptuous, become slightly more curious and less contemptuous. Not because you faked it well, because the practice is the thing. Aristotle got there first. We are what we repeatedly do. You don't get patience and then act patiently. You act patiently, badly, for a long time, and patience shows up. So the honest synthesis, I think, is this. Covey is right that technique without character eventually fails. Carnegie is right that you can't just sit and wait to become a better person. You practice into it. The two books are not enemies. Carnegie is the drills. Covey is the reason for the drills. Do the drills without the reason, and you get the guy at the party. Have the reason without the drills, and you get a person of excellent private character whose kids still don't feel heard. So how do you know, from the inside, which version you're running? Because everybody thinks they're the sincere one. Remember Gun Crowley. Nobody is the villain of their own story, including you and me. I've got 3 tests I use, and they're all uncomfortable. Test 1. Where does your warmth go? Not whether you're warm, the distribution. If you can graph your kindness against people's usefulness to you and the lines match, you're not a kind person, you're an efficient one. The tell isn't how you treat the client, it's how you treat the person who cannot do anything for you when nobody who matters is watching. Carnegie's post office clerk is the whole test. What were you trying to get out of him? Nothing. That's the point of the story. Test 2. What happens when it doesn't work? Use every principle in this book on someone, sincerely, and have them stay cold. If your reaction is a shrug and continued goodwill, it was real. If your reaction is resentment, I did everything right and they still, then it was a transaction all along, and you've just discovered the receipt. That flash of irritation is the most honest information you will ever get about your own motives, and it arrives fast. Test 3. The hardest. Can you still say the true difficult thing? Because if this book has quietly turned you into someone who cannot deliver bad news, cannot hold a boundary, cannot say, no, I think that's a mistake and here's why. You haven't gotten better at people. You've gotten more frightened of them, and you've dressed it up in 30 principles. Carnegie's own examples don't support that reading. Lincoln didn't send the letter, but he did keep command of the war. McKinley told the man his speech wouldn't do. He just did it in a way that produced a better speech, instead of an enemy. The point was never to avoid the hard content. It was to deliver it in a form a human being can actually receive. Here's the honest bottom line, and then we're done with the critique. Every technique in this book amplifies whatever is already there. That's the whole nature of a technique. Give these 30 principles to someone who genuinely likes people, and you get a person who is unusually good at showing it, which is a rare and valuable thing that improves everyone around them. Give them to someone who sees people as instruments, and you get a much more effective instrument user. The book cannot supply the goodwill. It can only root it. Which means, and this is the punchline of doing these 2 books in this order, the last book is the prerequisite for this one. The private victory comes first, not because character is more virtuous than skill, but because skill is a multiplier, and a multiplier applied to a negative number gives you a bigger negative number. So if you take one thing out of all these hours, the 30 principles are not the point. They're all the same idea, rehearsed 30 different ways. And the idea is that the other person is as real as you are, as full of reasons and grievances and hunger for a bit of importance as you are, and that almost everything that goes wrong between 2 humans goes wrong because one of them momentarily stopped believing that. You don't need 30 principles to act on that. You need about 4 seconds and a genuine question. So we end where Carnegie ended, which is with an instruction that nearly everyone ignores. He didn't want you to read this book. He said so in the front, in a section on how to get the most out of it. He said reading it once is not enough, that after reading it through, you should go back and spend several hours reviewing each chapter. He wanted you to keep it beside you, mark it up, review it every week, apply exactly one principle at a time, and, this is the part that gets skipped, keep a written record. His actual system was this: check yourself at the end of each week. What mistakes did I make? What did I do that was right, and how could I have improved my performance? What lessons can I learn from that experience? He said the principles will only take hold when you use them aggressively on real people and then go back and audit how it went. And I'll be honest with you, I have not done that. Not properly. I've read this book multiple times and I have never once kept the log. Which is probably why, at some point in the last month, I did nearly every wrong thing in it. I criticized someone in front of another person. I won an argument I should have walked away from. And I remember the specific little warm feeling of landing the point, and I remember the face of the person receiving it, and the face is the part that stayed. I have absolutely told someone they were wrong using nothing but a tone of voice. And there is a person in my life right now, one I actually love, for whom my primary mode of communication has quietly become a series of small corrections. So the guy in your ears is not up on some hill waving down at you. I'm the guy who read the book about not criticizing people twice and then went home and did it again. Here's what I keep coming back to though. Almost every principle in these hours is a subtraction. Don't criticize. Don't argue. Don't say you're wrong. Don't give the order. Don't take the credit. Don't correct in public. Don't lead with your want. Almost nothing in this book asks you to acquire a new ability. It asks you to stop doing things you're already doing. Things that feel productive in the moment and cost you the thing you actually wanted. And every one of them costs the same currency, which is that small, warm, immediate pleasure of being right in front of someone. That's the price, every single time. And it turns out that's a fairly expensive hobby, and most of us have been running it for decades without ever seeing the bill. Now. I'm not here to tell you what to do with any of this. I genuinely don't care what you do with it. Maybe you run Carnegie's actual 30-day experiment. No criticism, none. Not out loud and not in your head. Maybe you pick the single principle that made you wince the most while you were listening and use only that one this week. Maybe you go find the person you've been slowly correcting into silence and ask them a real question and then just not talk for a while. Or maybe you close this and change nothing. And honestly, that's fine. That's genuinely fine. It's your life and they're your relationships, and you know things about them that I don't. But there was a person on your mind at the start of this. I know there was, because I put them there. The one you've been trying to change, the one where the arguing isn't working. So before you go, one question, not what technique you'll use on them. When was the last time you were genuinely curious about why they see it the way they do? Not the last time you asked. Asking is easy, and most of our questions are just arguments with question marks on them. The last time you actually wanted to know the answer. If you can't remember, that's probably the whole problem. And it's also the whole solution, and it costs nothing. And you could do it today. That's it. That's the book.